Musical Talk, the independent musical theatre podcast at the Edinburgh Fringe. Hello and welcome to Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, but by dint of saying the magic word, Klatzlackism,
I am miraculously transformed into Dame Magnolia Spendthrift, elderly actress. Yes, but that's not all. By saying the word again, I can do this. Klatzlackism.
Yes, it's me, Thos Ribbits, back again. Now, what that was trying to do, perhaps slightly ham-fistedly, was to illustrate what today's theme is, which is transformation. That's right, transformation. Now, you're going to say, and quite rightly, well, hang on a minute, if the hook for today's interviews with people involved with musical shows at the Edinburgh Fringe this year is merely transformation, then surely that's such a wide catch-all, because you won't be able to find a show where some character isn't transformed in some way. After all, almost all drama is about the journey of the characters you're seeing on the stage. Well, as I've said, you're quite right to say that, and yes, you're also correct in spotting this is a little bit of a loose theme. However, I think that we can actually argue that the shows we're going to be talking about today are focused quite specifically on transformation, so that the character's development is not incidental to other narrative plot points, but actually one of the fundamental points of the shows in question. So stick with me and see if I'm correct. During today's programme, you'll be hearing interviews conducted by me and by David Kingsmill that involve producers, directors, actors, but also today we have a very heavy emphasis on people involved in musical direction. And that in itself will make this episode slightly more unusual, because it gives us another way into discussing these great musicals. Well, what better place to start than at the beginning? We're talking today about musicals where a character or several characters transform, and there can be no greater transformation than that carried out by the central character of Bat Boy the Musical. It's a cult musical in America. It has been in London. Didn't do so well there, but it was on this year at the Edinburgh Fringe, put on by Dulog, D-U-L-O-G. That's the Durham University Light Opera Group. Now, listeners with long memories and short fingers will remember that I've often met members of Dulog because they always put on a fabulous musical at the Edinburgh Fringe every year. And this year was absolutely no different. And indeed, I got speaking again to Doug Gibbs. Doug Gibbs is someone I've spoken to on and off pretty much for the last few years. And this year he was acting as producer to Bat Boy. So here's a conversation with him and with John, the director, and with Joe, the actual star who played Bat Boy and was in full makeup as we chatted. And then immediately after this conversation, which also involves David Kingsmill, David interviews the musical director, Matt House. And please note there is one explicit reference in the following interview. Musical Talk. Durham, we have this every year, and every year I meet you in the street, and every year you put on a fantastic show, and you haven't let me down this year, so thank you very much indeed. Bat Boy. First of all, how did you choose Bat Boy? And these are open questions, anyone may go in. Oh, there's been a nod in the direction though, so...
That's a very long story.
Oh, it is.
We were originally actually going to do the Drowsy Chaperone.
Which is also up here this year.
Which is also up here, yeah, well that's why we didn't do the Drowsy Chaperone. We phoned Weinberg to get the rights, and they had booked the rights about literally the day before we phoned them. So then John, the director, and myself, the producer, we had a bit of a panic weekend where we just went through Weinberger's entire catalogue of shows to find something else to do. And when I phoned them again, actually, they suggested Bat Boy, which both of us have heard of, but neither of us really knew.
Seen or done before,
yeah.
So.
Because it's a cult hit in America, and it did come
it's a huge hit in America.
Yeah.
But it came to the West End about 5 years ago and wasn't a massive success.
No, it wasn't.
It didn't have you, did it?
Well, it was quite a big success last time. It was at the Fringe in 2006, so that's what kind of gave it some promise for us.
Right, so you pick your show.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it does have its... I'm looking here because we have... One of the people here is looking at me with extra long teeth, which you're wearing for flying, are you not?
Yes, I am, which might make my S's a bit garbled in this interview. Yeah.
It's quite a physical piece, isn't it? I mean, it presents some problems which you probably don't get in other musical shows, one of which is that you have a cast member wearing very little at the beginning of the show, hanging upside down from a ladder, which isn't in most shows. Not in the version of Oklahoma I last saw. So, when did you sit down, you read it, you said, we like this, but there are challenges.
Yeah, it was kind of a long process, because especially for like the set in itself is like, it expects to be in a cave and a town council and house and all that stuff, especially when we have 5-minute get-in. It's the biggest problem of how the heck do we do that. And then the physicality of the show is kind of a difficulty, but I think just a fun challenge, because it's not anything that is undoable, just able to have fun with and play around. Like Joe for the entire first bits was just kind of playing with how to play Bat Boy.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's ask that question then. How does one approach Bat Boy?
I mean, the first thing I did was looked at the original Bat Boy and looked at some interviews with him, Devon May, who I'm a huge fan of.
Played it all over America, didn't he?
And in the West End as well. Yeah. And he's now in Jersey Boys, but it's a bit of a turnaround. So I watched interviews with him and I looked at what he'd said to research it, and I found the same thing he did, that watching videos of bats was not very helpful, because they don't really do very much.
You did have a DVD commentary on.
No. But
very high, but it's excellent if you can hear it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I watched some bats, that wasn't helpful, so I looked at kind of other animals, like dogs and cats, and kind of based it more on that, really.
Oh, you really did research into
I did a little bit,
thing?
yeah, I had a look. And then, I mean, a lot of it was from looking at what Devon did in his performance. I watched a lot of different people playing Bat Boy, saw what I liked. There were some Bat Boys that I didn't like. So I took the Bat Boy with the floppy arms, if you remember, rather. Some people do some weird kind of back bend thing, but I didn't do that.
Well, if you're hanging upside down in the cave, there's no reason why your arms wouldn't be floppy.
I know, exactly. My little limp wings, yeah.
Well, how did you go about developing the speech for it as well? Because obviously he spends the first, 20 minutes of the show unable to speak.
Yeah, right.
How much of that is... How is it scripted? Perhaps a better question. How did you develop what you did do with the vocalisation?
Because people have told me I sound like Stitch from Lilo and Stitch, like the noises that I make. But I don't know, because it tends to say Bat Boy mumbles, Bat Boy groans, doesn't it?
Some of the lines just look like they've just kind of punched the keyboard.
There's a lot of finesse.
QPD.
Welch.
Absolutely, yeah. So I just make whatever noises kind of come out of my mouth, really. I mean that helps in terms of singing as well. If I'm just doing the noises that come naturally, I'm hopefully not going to damage my throat for the songs later.
I've got to take you back, however, to the point where you were picking and mixing, if you like, from the different performances. I'm genuinely interested. What did you say is good about this performance and bad about this? Obviously, we saw that in the performance that you gave yesterday, which was masterful. But, you must have seen things you thought, actually, that really doesn't work, that really does work. What makes a good Bat Boy? If your advice to others who will follow
the toughest thing's the eyes, I think, it's very difficult to make your eyes not be intelligent, I suppose. I don't that's why I really try to never be looking at the person who's talking to me very often, and also it's very easy to respond to English, which you need to avoid. So there's an improvised scene, and I always forget that Bat Boy can't speak English, so she'll tell me to stand up straight, and I'll stand up straight and then be like, oh god, I should have done that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just, it needs to be a balance, because he needs to be a beast, but you also need the audience to like you, so you can't be too horrific, really, I suppose. That's the balance you need to try and strike.
You carry that off. I think the character of Bat Boy is very sympathetic, so I'd like to talk about that.
Yeah.
We've got the star, the producer, and the director here, if I may say. I feel I've got the people who know. So, what was the tone? When you were sitting down at the beginning, because there are different ways of playing. You're very, very different from London, and I'm going to say, much better than the London production, and that's not just flim-flammery on my part. That is genuine. I was very disappointed in London. I thought it really didn't cohere. That's not to say that I think the book is perfect by any means. There's a little bit of weirdness in Act 2, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But what approach did you take, really?
Well, the show, like, after reading it, because again, I hadn't actually read through the script or seen it at Ebony before we decided, like, this is probably the show we'll do. And the show has some major plot holes, as some of our reviews pointed out, but we kind of took that as a strength. It's just an absolutely, utterly ridiculous show. It's called Bat Boy the Musical. You can't take anything serious about it. So it's actually been kind of fun poking the audience, or the cast, even go, like, don't take this seriously. Don't take yourself, like, nothing about this is real.
It's heightened.
Go all the way over the top, and it makes it so much funnier. There's points like, because it's all cross-dressing and stuff as well. And so one of our cast plays a Ron, who's supposed to be like a 10-year-old boy, and she's a 20-year-old girl. And she just has so much fun with it. And completely takes it out of the audience at times. Like, she has a line where her brother just dies, and she goes, "Are you all right?"
Yeah.
And so she loves that line. Plays it up differently every day. It's just so much fun. Just don't take yourself too seriously. Play over the top, and the book then is an asset as opposed to a detriment.
But I'd also say that your cast, although they're giving heightened performances, it's not self-indulgent.
Exactly.
You know, it still has integrity.
It's a fine line to making sure you don't go too far to make it.
Did you have to draw anyone back?
No, actually, it's been just a lot of fun pushing people forward. There's a couple bits where
forward. I like that.
Yeah.
Very good. Forward, much better, much more positive. Yeah.
Exactly. And there have been a couple of bits where I said, well, maybe we should try something different because it's not actually getting the laugh or the joke that we want. But no, for the most part, it's just been a lot of fun working together, because that's when, if everyone's working as a cohesive unit, then you get the laughs and you get the fun out of the show.
I think both John and I prefer to get people to go way over the top and then rein them in, rather than have to build them up to the right level.
So we just continuously throughout the process said, go farther. I'll tell you when you've gone too far.
Doug, now you're producer.
I am.
What challenges does producer is nuts and bolts and logistics.
It is, yeah.
You don't absent yourself from the creative input, and you're in it briefly.
Yeah, I've got my little cameo. It's a bizarre cameo. I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit later.
It is looming.
No, well, it was a nightmare in some aspects. There's a lot of stuff that just seems absolutely ridiculously impossible to put together on a student budget. The cow head. The cow head. He needs Batboy eats a severed cow's head towards the end. That was one of the more interesting ones. Luckily, one of our cast actually made it out of papier-mâché for me.
So it's a vegetarian cow's
head. So that was good. I had to learn how to make fake blood. I mean, that was fun.
And it is fake. You can assure us.
It is fake. Yeah, it's fake. We don't.
Glad to hear
we
that.
don't sacrifice a cast member nightly. And there were just a lot of things. I mean, there's at one point somebody has to run out of a burning building, having just been burnt alive. That's interesting.
To the point where you're not being able to recognise them anymore.
Yeah.
Is what the script says. Still smoking is actually
still smoking.
Oh, really?
What the script says.
That's a bit.
We didn't end up doing that.
But you use a very good thing there, because you use one of his blank masks with char on it, don't you? Basically, and that does give you that sense of you can't recognise. Well, you know who it is, but the audience knows, but the cast don't.
That was actually. I mean, there were a lot of things that came together at the absolute last minute. That one we literally made in the flat on the day of the tech rehearsal, because I hadn't worked out how to do it until then.
Ideas until we're like, oh, we should probably figure that out today.
Either that or the real kerosene.
Well, I did actually look into sort of that gel that you can put on people to make them set them on fire, but
what a fiddle.
Well, yeah. You also we realised you're not allowed naked flame in our particular venue, unfortunately, so that went out the window. But yeah, it's been an enormous challenge, and having such a long time slot as well. Logistically, not so much logistically, almost pastorally, the cast are getting very, very tired a lot of the time, and it's a tough balance to keep them flying and doing a 2-hour show every day.
But a whip and invisible bruising help there.
A little bit. So,
forgive me, lead star with there's a huge dichotomy in the part, isn't
there?
As you've been saying, for the first third of the show, you are a guttural beast, and then you're suddenly an erudite, British-voiced gentleman, if I may say, with a splendidly over-the-top pronunciation, which the audience absolutely buy into from the moment you give it as well. And you're just like Doctor Who for the second act. Bow ties and sensible tweed. I like that. That's velvet, actually. I think it was.
Yeah, velvet. Yes.
But. Forgive me, how are you approaching it in what must be a massively physical job?
In terms of characterisation or in terms of maintenance?
Both, how do you keep yourself in tip-top form so you can make it to the end? And how do you drive yourself character?
I mean, adrenaline's a great thing, I suppose. I can be knackered at 7, and then by the time I'm on stage, that kind of drives me through. But yes, yeah, exactly. But I mean, I just have to take care of myself, I suppose. I'm not getting drunk every night. I'm sleeping a lot.
Tonight's going to be his first. We've got a day off tomorrow. Tonight's going to be his first drink for the whole run.
I've had to turn to food because I'm doubled my calorie intake for doing this part as well. So I just spend all my time eating pretty much. Yeah, absolutely.
You are wearing the prosthetics, so to speak. I should explain to the audience.
So I think I might get muscly legs from all the squatting I'm doing, possibly. I mean, in terms of the character, it's nice because it's so over the top that it's easy to kind of change between the two because you don't need this kind of subtle journey as such, because that's such a dichotomy.
It's a step change,
yeah, absolutely. But
it has sympathy. You were saying this earlier. The character has to have sympathy to make the second act work in any way.
And it's a very kind of, I mean, the whole process is very organic. So we do so many shows. You work out what works and what doesn't from each audience.
Where have you gone with that? Where, have you pushed in any particular? I am interested. What walls have you pushed at which you think actually this isn't working? I'll go back and try this one.
I mean, there's only small moments, I suppose. Like that, I learn what to milk. There's moments where Batboy can look cute, and so I really go for that. My face has probably got more and more ridiculous as the show has
You've got very
progressed.
expressive eyes. I mean, people must have told you that.
Yeah, I've heard it before. So
All over your face.
I've got very big eyes for my face. I mean, the first review, our 3 weeks review, specifically mentioned mine and Alyssa's face, which was nice, but quite a funny thing to have pointed out. But yeah,
I've got to ask you a practical question. You're wearing the prop now. You have false fangs.
Yes.
I hope.
Yes.
False.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
we've all worn false fangs when we were children. I mean, who hasn't? But it does make speaking very difficult. Both so that you can speak clearly, you can say your S's, and also you don't puncture your own face. Those must be more theatrical.
They are. I mean, it's
How do you cope?
I'll tell you where I got them from because it's a bit of a weird story. So I had to look up kind of Twilight fetishism websites.
Oh well,
so
more now than they used to be.
Yeah. So I think these got sent anonymously in like a brown parcel because
really?
I think some people use them for very strange things.
Oh, yeah. They're not secondhand, are they?
No, they're not. But they went on with a dental mold, so I just had to spend half an hour with my head back, unable to drool, watching an episode of 30 Rock alone. They're not as bad as people think because they only go with my canines. But yeah, it's when I take them off, I notice my diction's got miles better. So
is it? And yet you're speaking perfectly clearly, and you carried off yesterday's performance without a drop.
It's one of the things I commented on actually at the end of the performance, wasn't it? Was the simple fact that you were speaking and singing as well as you were with fangs, because I've worn fangs in my time.
Yes.
Both
not to do with Twilight.
Not to do with Twilight. No, absolutely not, or any of its associated possibilities. But both on stage and off, and I've spoken with fangs, and it is damn hard work.
Yeah.
So. I think actually the diction was really good.
Thank you. I think it's just like anything, practice. I got them in as early as I could and just did the songs as many times as I could. I mean, they occasionally fall out. I've got an expert at putting them back in with my tongue.
Oh, really?
They fall out
during the performance?
It's when I'm eating animals, they tend to, if they jar it the wrong way, they just drop out. I did have a night where it literally fell onto the stage and I had to just pick it up. But no, I think it's just practicing as early as possible, I suppose, is the main thing.
Can we talk about the book? Now, it's an interesting book, as you say. It's got holes in it. I'm going to go straight to it because we've alluded to it already. In the middle of Act 2. It's almost as though you know what I'm going to say. In the middle of Act 2, slightly apropos of nothing, when Batboy is running through the woods with Shelley, he meets Pan and a whole bunch of imaginary and figurative creatures, including, I think, a penguin on a occasion.
A turtle on a wheelie chair, just dragging himself along.
That was spectacular.
Just going to throw that in.
Now, I remember when I saw it in London, everyone just turned around and went, after that was, what the hell was that? There was a real element of that in last night's performance. Afterwards, what was that? Now, obviously, I mean, speaking, I'm not going to say I'm a writer of any note, but, speaking at if you look at it literally, there's phrases in that scene, which is a carnal pagan scene. They're all representatives of a sort of godless creatures, animals, therefore, presumably. They're also highly sexualized against this kind of Christian charity thing. But you get at the beginning of Act 2, which is the gospel number, and there's also a lot of, there are phrases in both songs, from the high Christian, but actually not being Christian at all kind of song, and the actually let's let it all go. So I can see the parallel there, and the acceptance and non-acceptance and that kind of thing. Makes perfect sense on paper. Bloody difficult on stage. Your thoughts? Open question.
It took us a while to really, for me at least, to figure out what to actually do with it, because it is such just in the middle of nowhere. They have sex and then we'll forget about it, basically. But we actually had a friend of ours who goes to Durham. She came in, choreographed 3 of the numbers. So I basically waited till she came up. She was coming up for 2 days and sat down. I was like, I'm gonna let you play with that for a bit, and then we'll kind of fix it up. So basically, she choreographed everything and left the dance break in the middle out, which is the actual orgy. So it was like, well, that didn't help at all either. So then had to go home and figure it out. And it basically, we went on a shopping trip, found all the animals. People decided animals, and then once we basically had that, could kind of play with it a bit more. And again, it's just going all out there, being completely fun and ridiculous. Last night, I actually heard 2 nights ago, someone in the audience literally at the top of their voice went, "What?" just as it started coming out. So they'll be pretty happy, because that's basically what it should do, is make you realise, because from that point on the show, at least in my eyes, it does get completely ridiculous. It's when we have people getting burnt and people getting killed for the third time and stuff like that. So I think that's just kind of the introduction to, remember you're watching a musical, that's stupid.
It's another gear change into ridiculousness.
And actually, Joe and I already did Wild Party, obviously 2 years ago in Edinburgh. So we're kind of inured to a on stage orgy. Yeah.
But that's the only reason you keep coming back, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just hoping for another one.
Because this is one of your cameos. You come on as Pat, don't you? Don't?
Yeah.
I have to say, it's been a while since I've seen anyone mime cunnilingus on a stage. And I have to tell you, I don't use this sentence very often on recording. And then I seem to remember you whipped yourself over your own buttocks.
Yes. No. Wait. It was.
Well,
it was a tiger whipping me with her tail. Yes. That's.
Yeah. It was we were paying attention. You understand?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
It was clearly quite well sort of thought through as well, because there was a lot of animal characterisation in what they were actually doing, in the sense of the turtle having sex extremely slowly. Which
the hare, that's my favourite bit, is the tortoise and the hare having sex.
Yeah, well, no hard feelings.
Exactly.
Did you do did you have an animal rehearsal where everyone's wandering around the...
Actually, no, it was everyone picked out their own animals, was I think part of it is like...
they're telling you something about your cat.
Exactly. It's basically, they did something that they're like comfortable in doing. Yeah. Our guy doing the tortoise, like, I'm comfortable like being the slow guy and being knocked. He had all these ideas. Girl playing the fox, she was like, oh, I have all these ideas how foxes move. So I think is what made it the easiest, is they already had a step up in what they wanted to do.
I'm sure David Attenborough would have been proud of this thing. And for you, of course, you're in the middle of this maelstrom, under a sheet, I think, Chris said. So in a way, your choreography is quite easy, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I've actually never seen it. I don't really know what goes on around me. So I'm just oblivious under a sheet.
So, how's the audience reaction been? Because you were telling me about your stars.
We had different. Yeah, the audience reaction has been excellent, actually. Generally, the vast majority of our audiences love it. We had plenty of people come up to us on the mile and say they loved the show, that they were confused by the animal orgy, but but that they loved the show. We've had very good reviews across the board. I mean, all the big publications really have given us 4s, which is great. We've had 1 or 2 2s as well, which I think is what you're driving at. Which is
the variety.
Oh, I see. Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. Yeah, but it's what we expected, really. I mean, one of them.
It's not a fault of the production. May I say that now? If anyone's giving it less than 4 stars, that is because the book has holes in it.
Well, no, the thing is, I mean, we had. I think we think there's quite a lot of personal taste involved as well. Not everybody's going to enjoy. Not absolutely everybody's going to enjoy the show. I mean, unfortunately, we had one who just is just some student review site who gave us 2 stars, and their opening sentence was that they were disappointed that it wasn't the prequel to Batman. So we went.
Do your research point.
Yeah, exactly. So that didn't bother us too much.
No. Understand. I get where you're coming from though, because I have to admit I didn't particularly fall in love with the show.
No.
Which is absolutely nothing to do with you guys whatsoever.
Completely.
I like to think I've got enough perspective to be able to stand back and say, okay, didn't like that, but you guys did a damn good job. But I think there's a Marmite quality about this musical, absolutely. Isn't there? And for me, I don't think I would probably go and see it again for 4 or 5 years. And
exactly.
I'm going to say it's complete reverse for me, because actually I saw it in London and thought, this is a pile of nonsense. Oh, sorry, louder. That was a pile of old nonsense in London. And a friend of mine was in it. As the Doctor character, but it really didn't cohere in London, and so therefore all its faults were really on display. I actually think, when I said earlier, this was better than London because you made a virtue of its failings. And the show has therefore gone up in my estimation because I thought yours was a top-notch show. So I would also like to give you 4 stars. If that's okay. We were discussing this earlier, weren't we?
We were indeed.
And a quotation, which is better than the West End. Which you may use.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Absolutely, that's going on the flyers.
Honestly, I'm very happy to confirm that. That's a solid show, beautifully performed, beautifully directed, beautifully produced, obviously. I'm no fool. I want to talk to you again next year. And fantastic. I hope that it carries on with great pleasure. Really, I'm not going to say a great show, a great production, ladies and gentlemen. Really, seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Musical talk.
Hi, I'm Matt Howes. I'm MD for Bat Boy at Edinburgh Fringe 2012.
Which Thos and I saw last night, and this is part of a group interview which I'm doing separately, so that we can talk a little bit about the music. Now, obviously, this is an interesting score. It's a rock musical in its style, but it's also stylistically influenced left, right, and centre, because you can draw little bits of inspiration from other composers in the music?
I'd say there's a lot of inspiration from nearly every musical style that there has.
This is very
been.
much actually. Thos said to me just before we went in, because Thos, will have come apparent, has seen this show before. I knew nothing about it other than a brief plot outline, and he said to me, spot the genres. Right at the top of the show, which I think you really can. There's a bit of GNS, there's a bit of Andrew Lloyd Webber, there's a bit of pretty much everybody, really, isn't
Very
there?
much so, yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting in the score. There's a couple of bits where it says a la Led Zeppelin Kashmir, and it tells in swing eighths, and it tells you.
So, in actual fact, the composers are absolutely shameless about the fact that they have taken inspiration from elsewhere.
Very much so, yes.
Which is nice. They're not trying to hide it.
No, it's.
And yet, at the same time, they've actually made it quite a holistic score, because although it has these styles coming from everywhere, and it is a little clashy, at the same time, it fits together.
I think it holds together. It's very recognisable as being of one musical. It's not as if it's been patched together from lots of different musicals and hooked together. It definitely still works as a whole.
And what was your approach been to that, bearing all of that in mind, and bearing in mind that you did have these sources of inspiration that you were directed to?
Well, it's obviously you listen to the inspiration, and I approach it with my own viewpoints and how I perform it. But I try and let the music speak as much for itself, and also I try not to not get in the way too much of the acting and what's going on, because I think ultimately in musicals, yes, the music is very important, and quite often it can be a very beautiful part, but it is still telling the story. So I've been very careful to try and get everything as being this is where the story's going, this is how we need to do it for that. I mean, sometimes there's quite a lot where we can just enjoy ourselves. To show you a thing or two is the band has quite a lot of fun playing that.
Sure.
And we can really get into the swing. But I think that's how I've kind of just approached it. Is just to make sure that at each point we know exactly the story we're telling, and that's how I've tried to make sure that nothing gets too bitty.
I'm not sure what could be heard behind us, but for the benefit of the listeners, we are just off the Royal Mile, and somebody's just struck up on a stage somewhere, so apologies for any random rock music noises in the background. That's not Bat Boy. How did you approach in terms of using those inspirations with the cast? Did you take the inspiration yourself? So take the Led Zeppelin reference, for example. Did you play Kashmir to the band? Did you play Kashmir to the cast and say this is where it's coming from, or did you keep that to you?
I think the band knew the references. I didn't have to, specify them too much.
Sure.
Whereas with the cast, I just kind of approached it, and in the process of teaching them the songs and teaching them how to do it, kind of got that influence out there without specifically saying let's do it, because a lot of the time. Because the rehearsals, it was just me playing piano, and for quite a lot of the songs, that's quite, you don't get the full sense of how it sounds.
No, understandably so.
And I think most notably what you want to do, which is funk guitar, wah, and it just doesn't work on a piano. So a lot of the times I said, okay, go away and listen to the London and the original Broadway soundtrack. But again, the thing is, I didn't want them to take on a performance that they listened to, or a performance. I wanted them to very much to do their own thing. And a couple of times I've told the cast before a show, do something different this show. Just obviously still do the same things that we've been doing before, but just add in something extra just to see what happens.
Keep it a bit more organic.
Yeah, which I think
awful word, but appropriate.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes. It's right just to do it absolutely to the letter, and to follow, to play Kashmir and do that. But I think sometimes it's good for them to have their own take on it.
Sure, absolutely. And did you make any cuts to the show, or any changes to the scoring at all?
We made a couple of cuts, mostly of underscore music,
right?
Where either fitting it in with the action was proving so difficult that it was much easier just to go straight through and have fast-paced dialogue rather than underscore.
Fair enough.
There's a couple of bits where we cut bits out of Revelations, which is the shadow play.
Yeah.
Where all of the massive plot details are revealed, and there's a couple of bits that are cut there. I think that the main difference is that both keys parts, because the show is scored for keys 1, keys 2, bass, guitar and drums. Both keys parts require very many sounds available because there's such a small band, but it draws on so many influences.
Of course.
There's requires brass sections, string sections, Hammond organs, pianos, celestes. I think you name it, it's there.
Well, I certainly noticed a fair few patch changes going on. 3 keyboards, 4 key. I certainly counted 3. I didn't know if there was a 4th up there. There are 3.
There's just 3. The keys 2 part is using 2 keyboards as MIDI controllers to an Apple Mac. We're using MainStage to get all the patch sounds. And originally we were going to have 2 Macs, one a laptop and then one Mac Mini.
Okay, yeah.
Because when I was involved with a couple of musicals at school, and we used that to help reduce down the orchestra needed. And I programmed that up, and I think each half for both keys 1 and keys 2 had in the region of 60 or so different patches. So it's quite an incredible amount, which the Mac Mini could cope with fine, but the laptop was struggling a bit because it didn't quite have the same processor power.
Sure.
So that meant that for the Mac, when using the Mac laptop, I had to condense that down quite a lot, which to begin with was the keys 1 part, because that has a lot less patch changes and it's mostly just piano. But during our 8-hour tech rehearsal, which is...
That's a marathon.
Yeah, that was quite a lot of work, given that we got up at 6:30 to get a bus up here, and we'd gone straight to the venue to do this tech rehearsal. We had quite a lot of issues with setting up the Mac Mini in the required period, because we have a 5-minute get-in for bass, and quite a large bass amp, guitar, 3 keyboards and drums, all in 5 minutes.
And you've not got the largest space, because for the benefit of the listeners, this is in C-1, which is their downstairs theatre, which is a lovely venue, but the band is actually up on a sort of mezzanine shelf area up at the top, which is only really wide enough. Well, looking at it from the ground, it looked as if as soon as you put in a keyboard and a person sitting behind it, that was your width gone. Yeah, that's the entire width gone when you sit there. I mean, the drum kit just about fits, but it's at an angle. So, and the cymbal, if there wasn't a railing, the cymbal wouldn't go; it would fall off onto the stage. So it's quite tight. Yes.
But it became apparent, certainly at the dress rehearsal, when our get-in overran by 10 minutes, that we couldn't use the setup for the keys that we had already. It was too much of a challenge to do in 5 minutes. So we have, out of the 3 keyboards, 2 are dedicated MIDI controllers and have no inbuilt sounds, and then one is a digital piano that I have that has a few banks of sounds.
Right.
It's not got the widest variety, but it still copes. So for the opening night, I reprogrammed the keys 2 patch to work and not crash on the Apple laptop, and then I played just using the inbuilt sounds of the keyboard, which again I miss a couple of things, like we don't have proper Celeste sound. I use vibraphone.
Sure.
We don't have rotary capabilities for the Hammond organ, Leslie. And it's not an ideal string sound, but I mean it gets the job done.
Absolutely, and that's the kind of thing you kind of have to do with Fringe shows, really, isn't it? Because this is, ladies and gentlemen, this is the challenge of doing a full-scale musical at the Fringe, and this is why a lot of companies will actually opt to write things rather than to reduce them severely, which is one of the things that intrigued me, was the fact that you did have quite a sizable and substantial band for this show in terms of instruments.
I think in the same venue, the largest band they have is 8-piece band, but I think that's just all acoustic instruments.
Yeah.
Which obviously.
So there's not so many amps and electronics and cables sticking around everywhere.
No, but I think the trouble was, though, is because there's such a wide variety of parts to the score. If you were to take out any one instrument, then great many of the songs would be compromised in terms of the style.
I think that's probably very true, because they are, particularly when you suddenly hit a gospel number, having the ability to sort of throw in the Hammond organ and things, you immediately get that sound, which you might lose otherwise. And in a show that's got a score this diverse, that would be a problem.
Yeah, and I think it would be a shame to do the entire musical, having not cut it particularly, and to then lose the different effects you get.
Agreed. Well, it sounded fantastic. You had a great sound in there. Good cast, sort of vocal work as well.
Yeah.
So jolly well done, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
With putting together what must have been quite a challenging show in terms of, certainly for your job.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I don't think that any of the parts are particularly easy to play. As well, so that's been quite a challenge to get that together. But it's come together really well, and we're, I don't know, 9 or 10 shows in now. So we've settled down into it, and it's going
good.
It's going great.
Well, very well done, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Musical talk. Well, as I said in that recording, we thought that was a 4-star show, and so it was. It made a great deal out of what is actually quite a flawed show in some senses, but the production was wonderful. And it was much better than the London production. Well, Bat Boy is a very well-established musical, and we're going to go on now to another well-established musical. In this case, even more so, because it's Stephen Sondheim's Company, put on by the Scottish Conservatoire, which is the former Scottish Academy of Arts. It was this year's showpiece production. Well, after seeing the show myself, I got to speak to Stuart Fleming, the Associate Musical Director. And in our conversation, we not only touched upon what it is that makes the Sondheim sound like a Sondheim, and you might want to write that down as a tongue twister later, but we also discussed transformation. In this case, the central character, Robert, is transformed from a commitment phobe to someone who is prepared to settle down. But of course, we also discussed transformation in the more logistical sense of a musical. How does an orchestrator transform a score? I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Stuart Fleming. Musical talk.
My name is Stuart Fleming. I am Associate Musical Director on Company at the Fringe.
Now, Company is an early-ish Stephen Sondheim, 1970, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some ways it's the first one that really sounds like a Sondheim show.
Yes.
Funny thing happens on the Forum, which is also here, down the music, isn't quite the same. From your point of view, as someone who's sort of musical director, innately connected with the score rather than the physical actors' performances, when someone says we're going to do a Sondheim, do you think hooray, or do you think, oh bother, that's a lot of fiddling?
I look forward to it. I think it's great material. It's intelligent material, and it's put together very well. I mean, the man doesn't put anything in by chance. It's all planned out, whether it be from the text or a dramatic purpose, or everything comes together. Literally, everything comes together and fuses and makes this one cohesive performance, which is it maybe appeals to the more intellectual audience. That some of it's quite heightened, but it's great material. It really is.
Does that include the score? Because I'm actually thinking more, because I know obviously he does the lyrics and music.
It's the content of the score. I mean, as far as harmony is concerned, he uses very rich and almost on the tonality scale. Sometimes it's quite dissonant in a lot of places, which you don't necessarily get in a lot of popular musical theatre. But the score, I would say, is slightly more complex than a lot of the scores out there, and I think he's known for that and respected for that.
Is it hard for you, as someone conducting, leading the group in front of you? Is it harder to do than others? I mean, a challenge, yes, of course, but
not necessarily harder to conduct than other shows, but I would say that the piecing and the putting it together, for example, the overture at the start, that is pretty complex. You've got all these different parts moving in and out of one another. The preparation for it's harder, but I wouldn't say the actual, once it's on its feet, the conducting is any trickier.
Oh really? So in some senses it matches what you'd expect elsewhere. Is there anything surprising in the score by Stephen Sondheim, or this score in particular? Does you think, actually, why is he doing that? I mean, does it puzzle you at any level?
I don't think so. I think you could read into it for ages and ages and ages. It's just, it's such a compelling story about that 30-odd single Bobby. I mean, it's something that we're all we've all either experienced or we're likely to experience that sort of bachelor lifestyle, and it depicts that life.
It ends at different times for different people.
Yeah,
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, definitely.
But forgive me, when you see the notes on the page, I'm just wondering, and I'll give you a good example. I was talking to somebody who recently conducted the Grand Duke, which is the last Gilbert and Sullivan, totally different century, let alone generation. And they were saying that there's stuff in there that Sullivan does which you don't expect Sullivan to do naturally. They say it's almost like he's playing with his own game. And not confusing, but doing things that just seem slightly different or odd, it was described. I wonder, this is an early sometime, but it is, if you like, I'm not putting this very well, is the dissonance recognised dissonance, or is it sufficiently unusual, even to an audience which has had 42 years to get used to it?
I wouldn't say
wrong
so.
Answer, by the way.
I wouldn't say so. I would say it's just Sondheim. You just know when you listen to it that's who it's by. I mean, for example, it's the way Sondheim's got his own style, but he can also write stylistically.
He can pastiche.
He can pastiche, absolutely. And A Little Night Music's a perfect example of that. It's polar opposite from Company. Company's got this sort of 70s sort of clavichord jazz type feel to it, and then A Little Night Music.
Harpsichordy stuff going on, wasn't there?
Yeah. There's a lot of that scored in it, but it's just I think it's Sondheim is Sondheim, in all honesty.
Well, I'm going to press you a little there, because you said you can tell it's Sondheim. How can you tell it's Sondheim? What are the hallmarks?
I think it's the harmony that he uses. It's the way in which he uses the notes and the way in which he puts the voices together. It's the phrasing marks, all these sorts of things. It's if you've done a lot of maybe to the newcomer, they wouldn't maybe sense, oh, this is slightly different. But to someone who's been doing it, you need to know what to look for. But you can tell, you do know.
Have you looked at other Sondheim scores? Does it feel like it's in a progression? Does it feel like an early Sondheim, or does he come fully formed?
I wouldn't necessarily say it feels like an early Sondheim. I think Sondheim writes across the board. I think everything he's written is very. What's the best way to put it? You take Sunday in the Park with George, for example. Now that's
which
later.
was your show last year.
Yeah, I was nothing to do with that.
The Scottish Academy.
But you take that, or even Merrily We Roll Along. Yeah. That's another one that was written near enough, roughly the same sort of time as Company.
It's about 10 years later. It's 81.
Was it 81? I thought it was earlier than that. But I mean, you could swap them, and you just get that sort of sound. You just know when you're listening to Sondheim.
I don't disagree with you as a ham. I mean, I discover them from the albums, and I didn't know the order they came in when you're first sort of stepping your toe in the world of Sondheim. And yes, they did sound from the same pen, although you wouldn't say they were at all the same. Very curious. I've got to ask you the big question I would ask. You're delivered with the paper for you to look at. You open the book, and there you are with all the notes. It's a Sondheim score. It's obviously a Sondheim score. Who is responsible for that Sondheim sound? Is it Sondheim or is it Tunic? Are you actually looking at a Tunic work? No one's going to sue, so...
that's the question. I don't know how to answer that.
Have you ever seen a non-Tunic Sondheim orchestration? I'm desperate to hear one, not because I don't think Jonathan Tunick is anything other than a genius, but I'd love to know how Sondheim would sound if you were doing it as a Salvation Army band.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's throwing it out there, isn't it?
Well, I asked the question, and no one's had the answer yet, so...
That's maybe why I'm struggling.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know. That's a hard question.
Can you spot the hand of an orchestrator in a score, not just for Sondheim and
I think different arrangers and different orchestrators have their own tricks and their own ways of working the harmony and stylistic features within things.
Did you start to separate that? Because you were talking about Sondheim's harmonies, but we're also talking about Tunics or whoever in this case.
I think they all have their own trademarks in a way. I think they all have their own tools, and it's the more that they do, I think their tools and their sort of trademarks follow through all their work, like it does with everyone's. I mean, there's certain ways that I'll conduct, there's certain ways that I'll play that is of me. So it's that sort of thing. It's a bit.
I'm going to talk about your conducting style, because today I had great fun watching you as much as I enjoyed watching the performance today, because You're very lively, if you don't mind. The baton's in your left hand.
Yes, left-handed. I get this all the time.
Well, it's interesting that people stop singing. And you bounce up and down on your feet. And also you seem to sing all the lyrics, even when some of the walk-down music, when there's no one singing, I noticed. I mean, is this your way of getting into, living the score and transmuting it for your
I think it's a bit of that, and I think it's also a bit of support for the cast, so that they know that I am with them if I'm singing along with them. It's not necessarily that they need to look up and think, oh right, that's the lyric at this point in time. I think it's just more of a team thing. That's what I try to put out there.
I'm going to say this honestly, I'm a words man more than a music man, so you can bamboozle me as much as you like, because I won't know any better, but how precise an art is it? Forgive me, because you're in charge of the orchestra, but you have also got to keep the performers with you, as you quite rightly said. So these are the methods you've been doing it by being active, by being seen on the peripheral visions, presumably, and things like that. How much responsibility falls on your shoulders if an actor loses the tempo? Do you bring the tempo to them, or are they expected to come to you? These are the layman's questions, you understand.
I need to watch what I say here. I think it depends on opinions.
Figuratively, no one specific.
Ultimately, I mean, the conductor should follow the dramatic intention of the text and the intention of the actor. But there's also a bit of come and go.
It's symbiosis in some sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Synergy, as everyone likes to say these days, in management.
I think it's a bit of a team game. It's known when you're leading and when they're leading, and just there's that sort of sympathetic relationship that's going on. I would say that's.
Presumably that must all be based on trust. The regular rehearsals.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. There needs to be that sort of team player motion, that sort of mood going on within the cast. Because if it's not there, you don't have anything. It's to be truthful, it's like someone coming in and conducting it dry that doesn't know the cast. There needs to be some sort of energy or previous sort of sense of relationship, I would say.
Do you find, I hope you don't mind me asking this,
No.
Forgive me, sometimes it's also deceptive. People coming to a Sondheim sound, if they come to company for the first time, they'll say, oh, this sounds like a 70s thing, and the orchestration backs it up, and it could be a single from that period. Any time from about 1967 to about 1975, I should think, in terms of some of the orchestration and the musical instruments that are used or invoked. But people would hear it a little bit bitty in some senses. And yet there's a really rich musical bed for the performance, it seems to me, which I don't think people spot. For example, I listen to the music. Obviously, a song is the words and the music in its entirety. But when people absorb what's going on the stage, because they're also trying to pick out what the actors are doing and draw out the action and learn the lesson of the song, so they sometimes miss some of the elements. And it seems to me the first elements which are missed or conglomerated are those elements of the score. So for today, during there's one particular song. It was When Another 100 People.
Yes.
There's a lovely bit of scoring in that, where the Bobby Baby Bobby Booba stuff is going on over that, which I've never heard before. And I think you only ever pick these things up in live performance, which is one of the joys of it.
Well, I think that's one of the trademarks of Sondheim. His music can stand alone in the text, and the melodies can stand alone, which is the intelligent way of writing. There's often in Sondheim you've got probably 3 melodies going on at the peak.
So it's a proper integrated score at every level. Absolutely,
but the other thing is the melody and the accompaniment both complement each other, but there's often no support for the voice at all. That the voice has to be learned. It complements it very, very well, but the voice, the vocal part of the melody needs to be known inside out.
Yes, if you took the words away from The Ladies Who Lunch, for example, you just have a sort of kind of salsa sound, wouldn't you, really? Because I was listening to it.
Even a better example is Not Getting Married Today, when...
which is his Gilbert and Sullivan moment.
Yeah, when... I'm trying to think of the character's name. I was going to use...
Paul.
Amy and Paul, sorry, that's it. Amy and Paul are singing this sort of polyphonic thing going on. At the end, none of it is supported by the accompaniment. You've got this and harmonically it's changing and progressing as we move forward, but at the end they both come and do their duet and there's no support there. That's creative writing.
Does that worry you as the musical director?
Yes, At the start it does, but once you set it, and normally it's fine. Normally,
so it's
okay.
almost that thing about pointing a boat down the river and just hoping it doesn't hit the sides.
Yeah.
You've done as much as you can.
Pretty much. But no, I mean, you normally it's getting into these bits. It's the transitions between the Bless This Day and then the patter sort of sections. But once you're in that, you're fine. All the rehearsal and all the sort of technique that you've worked upon is normally suffice enough to support it all.
But talking about your own personal progression, obviously this every year the Scottish Academy puts on a fabulous show, quite often the Sondheim in the last couple of years, although I think they did Iron Curtain about 4 years ago, which was so marvellous. And there's always two sort of newer works as well in the sort of ensemble for the envelope of music for the year.
New musicals and
Are you
development.
involved in either of those this year?
No, I'm not. This year it's Active Virgin and Towards the Moon.
I'm seeing Active Virgin, I think, tomorrow.
Tomorrow. No, I'm not involved with them. It's actually my two friends they're the other MDs that are on the course that are leading those. But they're very, very good. Very, very
and
good.
is this your last year with the Academy?
Yes, it's only a 1 year. It started in September and ended in September.
So it's your first year as well, then?
Yeah, pretty much.
So what now for you, if you don't mind me saying?
Well, I work on God's good grace, in all honesty. I'm going down to London.
I don't know that piece, who wrote that?
I'm going down to London in September to do a showcase at the Criterion in Piccadilly Circus.
Really? Okay.
And then it's just contacts, work, basically. That's where I'm headed. I've got a few things in the pipeline, but obviously I don't want to jinx that just yet.
Fine. Good luck.
But we shall see how things progress.
Well, I wish you every success with your future career. I hope this isn't the last time we meet. Final question then. What will you take away from Stephen Sondheim's company yourself when you close the book on your conducting for the last time for this particular production?
Probably the great fear that I could become Bobby.
Really?
That's I've never. Obviously, when you do a show, you research it and you read the play and read the book and just research things about it. And that's my biggest fear. That's, in all honesty, it's getting to that point in life. And now I totally understand the midlife crisis. Totally get it.
You're a little young for that.
No.
When your hair goes, that's when you need to worry.
When you go in, when you research and you go into things and you just become surrounded by the material. Something struck home that this is life.
It is from truth, isn't it?
It
absolutely is. Yeah. I was single at 35. I'm still single now, by the way, so I'm still living the dream.
Living the bachelor's dream.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed.
Not a problem.
A real pleasure speaking to you. Musical talk. That was Stuart Fleming, and I'm extremely grateful that he agreed to speak to me. It was straight after the show, and I probably would have wanted to lie down, but no, he came and spoke to me, which was very generous of him. Now, the Scottish Conservatoire was doing this year, as it always does, one centrepiece show plus two new musicals, at least in development. I only got to see one of them, which was Active Virgin. Now, I wasn't smart enough to realise that was a spoof of the idea of Virgin Active, which is a huge chain of gyms in this country. In this case, it was a new British musical by the Scottish Keelty brothers, and the context of it was, well, essentially, sinister goings-on in a gym where customers were trying to transform themselves from what they perceived to be ugly people into super fit humans. Add to that a mysterious doctor with a companion called Amy and an all-powerful computer, and you have that rare thing as science fiction musical. I got to speak to the assistant director and the musical director and arranger in this interesting conversation about Active Virgin. Musical talk.
My name's Ryan Ferry, and I work as assistant director on all three of our shows and as associate company manager as well.
I am Andrea Grody, and I'm music director and arranger for Active Virgin.
And it's Active Virgin we're going to be talking about today. But, well, let's start at the beginning. The Scottish Academy every year brings up one big piece, a showpiece, which runs rather amazingly in Edinburgh at the Fringe for more than 2 hours. Yeah. So well done on that. And you give us an interval, which is unheard of. But actually you also bring up other things as well, work in development, new works. A few years ago it was In Touch by Dougal Irvine, which has just made it down to London in its final form, I'm pleased to say. It was marvellous. So, you know, you're doing great work for the musical community. So how did Active Virgin come to be?
Well, last year we worked with the Keelty brothers for Wasted Love, which was just received well by everyone.
It was one of the talked about shows last
It was
year,
a really great piece. And basically, were you part of the musical development?
Yeah, I was. Around? So the master's program in musical theatre involves 2 weeks of new musical development, as I think do the undergrad programs. Our program is really involved with developing new works that the students are then performing in. So the Keelty brothers came this year to one of those weeks with an idea for a show, Active Virgin, and maybe 2 songs, including one from actually a previous show. And we just sat the first day and just talked about gym culture and body image and all of those things. And from that week of discussion, and then John and Jerry Keelty bringing in new material, we developed a little 20-minute segment of a show that was very well received. And from there, the Keelty brothers worked, and we came back in June with pretty much the full draft that we have now.
As late as June, for pretty much solidifying it. Really, that seems to me quite tight.
The final song actually wasn't written until 2 weeks before we opened. There were lyrics, but none of us knew the tune, so we just came in one day and slammed it out in an hour and a half.
Oh, well, you can't tell that there's anything other than sort of craft behind it, which is impressive.
They've worked very hard.
So when did you two sort of jump on board this project? Have you been with it since the beginning, or?
I was put on board literally just as we started in middle of June, really, just to work as assistant director with Susie Dumbrick, the director, and I worked on all 3 of the shows. And so I was...
Just for the record, we ought to say it's Company by Stephen Sondheim.
Yes.
Active Virgin, and the third
Towards the Moon as well. And I'm on the BA programme for the musical theatre. So during my summer break, I'm working here.
No real break.
Yes, exactly.
So you joined in about a month and a half ago in real terms, and that was for... you said there was a 20-minute section already in existence, so presumably some direction or at least blocking was already in place. I mean, how much do you have to do when you jump on board a project which is starting to coagulate?
There was a sharing which sort of like had a vague idea of what the style was, but one of the problems was because there were so many locations within the gym and sort of within Fringe, you can't really show it. So it was a case of like, how do we show that? Well, exactly. So we sort of worked around, right, okay, so lighting's the situation, how do we stage that? And then we had a choreographer come in, Lynn Bustard, and who sort of helped develop the style as well. And it's such a difficult piece for them, like both physically and, I mean, you've got a guy singing up there doing press-ups whilst like hitting his top range, so, you know.
I suppose in that sense, I mean, because it's set in a gym, and we should talk briefly about what the plot is such as it is, yes, most of the protagonists, in fact, nearly all the protagonists, apart from our sort of hero and heroine, are constantly working out when you see them, aren't they, in various forms. And yes, it looks tiring to watch in that sense, but of course I hadn't stopped to think what effect that kind of use of the body must have on singing.
It's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, because obviously dancing is part of musical theatre, but working out as such is sort of something which press-ups constricting. So when you're going up there,
well, the oxygen's being used for a different purpose.
Well, yeah.
I mean, just simply when you're singing, you're using it for that. But if you're also then making sure your body doesn't die, on the whole, that seems has a dual purpose.
And part of my job as music director has been to keep the integrity of the music while they're adding the choreography. So when we actually first staged it, it was more than you see on stage when you see the performance. And then both from the actors and from my response, we've said, and now we have to tone it down a little bit or no sound will come out because the priority is, of course, the text.
Yeah. It is actually... it's a heightened piece, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I think you couldn't say it was being done seriously.
It's not a naturalistic piece.
No,
but it's not a naturalistic piece. But it's sort of. I think the subject matter is obviously very serious, so that brings it back down to earth, I suppose.
And they take themselves and their characters very seriously.
Oh, they're not mugging it. No, absolutely
no.
not. No. But it's a fuller experience in the gym than one might actually have. Not that I'm a great regular, I have to say. So, from your point of view as the music director, the score has come to you in dribs and drabs. Does that present problems to you in a sense? Because obviously, forgive me, you're also the person on stage who is actually banging it all out on a keyboard.
It was just the one song that came later. Pretty much everything else came as we were going through music rehearsals, so I was able to pace myself with arranging. Because what happened with the music was John is not a writer on the page or on the computer. He will create a demo. He will sing what he wants to hear.
Yes.
And he'll add in instruments and drum tracks and give that to me and say, go. And then from there, I've done all the arranging and honored what he did, obviously, but putting it into my own fingers. So it actually works very well and makes my job a little bit easier because it's all going through me, so I don't have to write it out, except for the performers.
Well, you are the catalyst, aren't you, for the performance in some sense. Tell me, Is it challenging?
Yes.
How? Elaborate. I mean, is it music itself, or is it just the fact that you're doing everything and you've got so many instruments to play at the same time?
The biggest challenge is lining up the drum tracks and all of the patch changes, because what's actually happening, if you look at my setup, I have 5 pedals, and one of them is a normal keyboard pedal. One of them starts drum tracks, one of them skips between drum tracks, so if they have a section of dialogue and then they go on, I have to hit it so it moves on. And one of them is changing the volume, because with the synthesizer you can't just be loud or soft, you have to have a pedal. And then the other one is changing from patch to patch, so when I have a different sound I have to hit the pedal for that. So the hardest part of the show, the actual playing, is pretty simple, is balancing my 2 legs between all of those things.
We're very lucky in the sense of we came into one of the first days of rehearsal and Andrew was just surrounded in a corner by wires and laptops and everything, and that's because we're so lucky to have such an organised MD, as well as the facilities that we have at the Royal Academy.
And the benefit for me is that this being an educational process, I was able to say I'd like to come in and do all of this crazy stuff that I didn't know how to do. So I spent a lot of my time just learning what this was.
Technique learning.
And getting the support from the school to let me do that while we were rehearsing and make mistakes so we could have the product we have now.
How would you describe the score?
It's such a varied score. I would call it high energy. High octane is the word I often use.
Which is appropriate for Jim, of course.
Yeah, it's very... Jim-esque. That was sort of what we were going for. John touches on a lot of styles. He's really big on ensemble stuff for this piece, so there's a lot of big, heavy music in that way. That's probably the best way I could describe it.
It's quite muscular as well, isn't it? I mean, muscular, I'm not just saying that because it's a pun, but it is actually quite solid. It's it reflects... It's muscular. It reflects the weight of the piece in its sense. Yes. Now, I've got to ask you this. From my point of view, I can see you on stage and an amplifying loudspeaker. Mm-hmm. Is any of the music pre-recorded? Do you have to feed that in, or are you doing everything?
The only things that are pre-recorded are the drum tracks. Yeah. So I hit the button and it goes...
But you've got the control of those, so they're not...
Yes, and I control them, and I actually made all of them myself.
Oh, right, so it really is you.
As much as it's pre-recorded, I tried to honor as much as I could the work of us doing this piece.
So I assume you have private health insurance for the end of this?
Yes.
So from your point of view, as the assistant director, what challenges did this script present for you?
I think... Well, the script's easy to work with because obviously Susie, when working, if something wasn't working, you're always in contact with, the Kilty brothers, so you're able to constantly talk through that. But I think one of the main challenges were the sort of choreography and keeping the value of the text. I mean, because it's such a difficult thing to do as an actor, and because everyone wants everything in there. But I mean, it was just physically impossible. Some of the things that were being asked to do.
I agree.
Oh, really?
Well, just because. You could do it for one number, but you'd need like a rest afterwards.
Yes. And if you're on stage a lot, then you...
Yeah, they are moving constantly on and off stage.
Building stamina.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, because there was a scene when I think it's actually the scene when some of the cast die and they're lying on the floor. There's a bit of breathing, which I don't think anyone begrudges. And bearing in mind they've been running around like glass flies, as they say. How would you describe the tone of the piece overall? Is there an adjective that you go for?
Zany.
Zany. It would have to be a word like that,
piece.
because I think it just does cover everything.
It's funny.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting it to be funny, actually. I don't think I got that from the title. I don't think I got much from the title, actually, in a strange way, to reveal what the story was. So it was almost a closed book to me. I wasn't expecting anything particularly. And if I was expecting something, I think I was expecting something quite serious about the nature of celibacy, actually, which of course it isn't about in any real sense, but it is about love or self-loathing of body. And
it's odd because we are really getting great audience numbers, and we're flyering, but people come in they have no idea what to expect, and so I think people genuinely see the show and go, you have to see it.
Yes.
And that's all they say, because people are just so surprised, and that's why it's so funny, because you just don't expect things to happen.
Lots of lovely little in-jokes in there, though, if I may say. Was it yours as musical director's decision to put when the French model agent phones, there's the Allo Allo theme tune at super speed on the mobile, and it did take me I thought, I know that tune, oh my goodness, it's the Allo Allo theme tune.
Well, I knew that I wanted it to be something accordion, and actually one of the British actors, Charlie, in the show said, you should do the Allo Allo theme, and I hadn't heard of it because it's not something in the States, but I looked it up and I put it in, and it gets a lot of laughs from the audiences here.
It's a lovely bit.
So I'm glad you caught it.
Now, the piece is slightly heightened, but it has truth in it. We were talking about that. So, there's a difficult balance, it seems to me, and it affects both of you, both in the music and in the direction, of finding and keeping the truth in full view, which is actually that there are a lot of people who don't like themselves and perfection is impossible. There's a lot of self-loathing in this piece, which is actually, for a funny piece, nobody likes themselves. Even the heroine, if you like, the Amy character says, but I'm really irritating. I mean, it's a throwaway joke. But actually, nobody there, apart from this doctor character, who we'll come to in a minute, seems to have any self-love. So that's quite a difficult context in which to wrap a comedy, and yet it works very well. And you've got this, and it's a heightened comedy. It's more than a portrayal. It's a full-on portrayal, shall we say. So how do you square that? How do you bridge those two positions?
I think it's difficult, but I think the main thing is it comes from the honesty of the actors, I suppose. I mean, the opening section is all sort of like about parts of the body, and although it's done in humour, they're very honest and they're completely open to the audience, and especially in rehearsals. And I'm sure I wasn't part of the musical development, but I'm sure in the development process that they were all honest with their opinions of the gym and like why they go and everything else like that. So I think that's the main thing, that it comes from their honesty. Yeah,
that was really the first thing we did, have a big talk about all of our own insecurities, and we went around complimenting each other to make ourselves feel good. But the thing about all of the heightened craziness of the show is it comes from a place that a lot of people experience. Most people, I might even go so far to say, and most people don't get that far, but of course that's the job of musical theatre, is to push it all the way to the limit.
Yes, explore to the envelope, isn't it, really? Absolutely. I mean, funny enough, the very scene you mentioned, in a way, almost encapsulates the answer to the question anyway, which is that there's this early scene where everyone reveals that they're working out, and then they remove a small item of clothing to reveal drawn lines, the scalpel mark lines, if you like. And that's quite vicious in a strange way. I mean, it's quite... There's just
drastic,
an edge. There's an edge. There's an edge. There's just enough sand in this oyster all the way through, isn't there, to remind you all the way through? But actually, it's all a bit. If it was done absolutely. When I use the word straight, I'm using it in the normal sense. But if you actually took it down a tone and you did it absolutely straight, it will be horrifying. And it really would. In fact, it would be much more like an episode of Doctor Who. Which we do use it sometimes. Now, it took me halfway through the. There's this character called Doctor, and he may or may not be called Doctor, at least that's how it seems at the beginning. And then suddenly you realise that he's talking about his companion Amy, and he's dressed in a fairly conservative style compared to everyone else. He's not got the bow tie on, but and the actor himself seems to have Matt Smith's hair. I can't help it. I'm sure Matt Smith will want it back. Which I know he's also in company, so that's 70s
that I promise the hair is the hair's for company.
But it doesn't detract from the character. It took me a long time to realise that this was a Doctor Who, not the Doctor Who, a Doctor Who, and Doctor Hugh, as he later gets revealed as, and the sonic screwdriver comes out. This is just presumably the composers having a laugh, isn't it? Because I interviewed them myself some years ago, I think, and they were very sci-fi minded. They did the War of the Worlds in 10 minutes. The complete Jeff Wayne musical.
They are huge Doctor Who fans.
All sensible people are.
I mean, coming into this, I said I really need to learn about the show. I don't know. It's a big theme of the show. They're such fans. I'm glad that everyone recognizes it. From the beginning when he says his first Doctor, and everyone laughs. I say, okay, they're going to be with us.
Especially like when you're sitting in the auditorium, you're going, oh my god, that end joke is going to land so well.
And it lands like 7 times.
It does.
It's every time, because they think it's always over, and the next line is also a joke, which is great.
Yes, it's a double whammy, isn't it? There's also, the sonic screwdriver turns up halfway through, just briefly to lock a door, and there's a lot of pennies dropping at that moment. You can hear that as well. And forgive me, it seems to me, and you may tell me I'm wrong, but there's a piece of music you use towards the end, which is perhaps resonant of Murray Gold's oeuvre.
It is indeed.
Is that by you as the arranger and the orchestrator, or is that from the brothers themselves, or is it a happy compliment?
It's a combination. When they suggested Chase Music, I first went towards a totally different route, but they knew what they wanted, and I said, send me a YouTube clip, and they sent me a YouTube clip, and I had the idea, and I am hopefully paying homage to it without...
Well, I spotted it, and I heard contented sighs from the ILI, so I think there was recognition. Let's put it that way.
It's just, I will leave the crazy specific musical stuff to someone else, but the sounds hopefully give the feel of it.
Now, I've got to ask you, let's get the business end of this out of the way. How can people see Active Virgin? Because it's not on every day, is it? Because it's one of the development shows. It's sort of in rotation.
Yes, it's on every other day, and on the other day, it's towards the moon.
And in the same slot?
In the same slot,
Yes.
12 o'clock. And then all of the cast are in company for 4:20.
every day.
Every day.
Except
that's every day.
Monday the 20th.
Yep.
But we are on every odd day until the 27th.
Every odd day. Yes, isn't it?
But yeah, so we've got a website for that, Company at the Fringe.
Company@thefringe.com.
Well, thank you for talking to me about Active Virgin. When the dust has settled, what would you both take away from it?
From such a big question.
I think for me, because to work as predominantly as an actor in later life, for me, it's just sort of the energy that it takes to make an audience like that laugh has to go into the first day of rehearsal, and that's not easy to do with a mirror in front of you. And I think that's it for me. Yeah, just how hard it is.
So hitting the ground running, actually. And you say it's hard, but how did you manage it then?
God, it's just that bravery thing which I was talking about with the actors. It's just going full pelt and giving everything into it, because actually, to be honest, having the mirror in front of you is worse than having the audience, because you can see it. And especially with the piece that we've just talked about, I mean,
there's a lot of mirror work in it.
Completely, yeah.
It's spoken about.
Yes.
I mean, obviously the reflection room works at 2 levels, I fully understand. That's very interesting. Also, just about the craft of acting. And you?
Well, I must make the personal acknowledgement that I've learned so much about music technology from doing this show. But the other two things, one is just comedy. It's fascinating doing comedic pieces, especially like this, where the Keelty brothers have a very specific style that works well and is so different from the way I think, but it's so successful. So watching that happen through musical theater has been fascinating. And also, in a similar note to Ryan, being aware from the beginning of what we're going into musically, physically, and because usually the first day of rehearsal is music, and knowing the first second what's going to happen as much as possible is very helpful.
Can I ask you a supplementary? I've got to ask this, forgive me. Your accent betrays the fact you may not be British.
I am not British.
I spotted that. Forgive me, because this strikes me as quite a British, although it's set in an American style gym, there's commercials which are full on and all this. The humour strikes me as very British.
It is
very,
quite
very
British.
British. Possibly even you could define it even as Scottish, as the brothers themselves are.
Yes.
But it certainly it speaks to a British audience. Culturally, how easy is it for you to connect into? I hope you don't mind me asking that.
Oh, it's fine. It's been something I've been not working on, but paying attention to all year since I've been here since last September. Part of the reason I watched Doctor Who was just to get that sensibility in my body a little bit. It's funny doing this show because the other show we're doing is set in Greenock near Glasgow, so all of the Scots are in that one.
Boys.
So this cast is mostly Americans and Canadians.
Yes, I noticed there's a lot of a boot going on.
So it's actually been interesting, just even working with accents on the music, words that don't flow as well because John has written them for his accent. So it's been really good to have so many nationalities among us because we find a happy medium.
And that's the truth as well, because they're all in their own accents. There's no fake accents, and that's just sort of vulnerability, I suppose, and truth of it all.
But I hadn't realised that most of the cast weren't necessarily British. So getting a kind of sort of pantomime is used so pejoratively, and it's not also the right term here, but there's a sense of breaking the fourth wall and having a lot of obvious fun. So there's certain parallels with it, and pantomime's always seen as a very British thing, even though it's obviously originally Italian, of course. But to have the cast and you, forgive me, create this splendidly, I don't think anyone seeing it would say it was anything other than a British piece, certainly culturally. It's fabulous and fascinating, and all power to you, Robo, if I may say.
Thank you. It's been a lot of work, and we've had a lot of support from the British people in the cast, from Susie, who's Scottish, from Ryan, who's British. So it's been a collaborative effort.
Well, for me, that was definitely a 4-star show, and it's an absolute hoot. I think that probably sums it up quite nicely. Is that all right?
That's great. Thank you.
Musical talk. Well, my thanks to Ryan and Andrea there for talking to me about Active Virgin. But Ryan was also involved in Company, which we were speaking about earlier. So after Andrea had gone, I got speaking to him again in his role as Associate Company Manager for Stephen Sondheim's Company. So that's Active Virgin, but there are 2 other shows, and of course the big one, the showcase one this year, is the Academy's choice of another Sondheim, having had Sunday in the Park last year, which was absolutely tip-top, by the way.
Thank you.
I mean, it was the Scottish premiere as well, wasn't
Yes.
it? After many years waiting. This year we've got Company. in some ways, Stephen Sondheim's first really Sondheimy show that was a success. I mean, we had Anyone Could Whistle before that, and of course, the funny thing happened. Well, Anyone Can Whistle wasn't a success, and honestly, Funny Thing Happened doesn't really sound very Sondheimy. I mean, it does if you listen, but it's not a typical Sondheim show at all. And of course, it's on here in Edinburgh. Although
it is, yeah,
songs,
I've seen it around somewhere. Yes, I thought it was the abridged version.
It's only got
just the
Comedy
book.
Tonight
and
the book. I mean, it's very, very funny, but it's not the musical version. So, Company. When you were playing the same role, acting the same part in this as assistant director?
I got offered to work as assistant director for it, just because I have an interest in directing. And then I found out they were doing Company, so I grabbed that chance. And the director is Dominic Hill. And so when I found out that, I was definitely on board. Because I also went to see... Basically, when I found out, I went to see King Lear, which Dominic had done at the Citizens Theatre, which was just incredible. So I was really excited to work with him. And for me, it started as a process as sort of the read-through, the sing-through. And although we do the same course, MA and BA, I hadn't actually worked with the MAs that much.
Oh, right, okay.
So I sat in
the MA's a one-year course?
Yes, it's the 1 year. So I sat in the room with them as they sung through and read through, and I was... I can't even tell you, it was just incredible.
You knew Company beforehand?
I also knew Company, yes. I just sort of hadn't had it all sung through live, at obviously soundtracks. So it was just so moving. And then we just started the process, and it was a case of sort of me watching at first and sort of getting comfortable with that. And we also had a choreographer, Lynn Bustard, come in as well, because at times there's like a lot more choreographer than you think it would have.
Yeah, no one thinks dancing for Sondheim, do they?
No.
And it's not dancing per se, it's choreography. It's movement, and particularly but the Cod vaudeville numbers, like What Will We Do Without You, of course has to have some kind of dance. I mean, they wear bowler hats, don't they?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, so there is more movement in this than perhaps you might expect to see.
I think my favourite thing about this production is the fact yes, it is musical theatre, but the text is brilliant. I mean, the text is incredible. And when you say about the whole sort of the musical numbers, it's actually Bobby tends to be high for those points, and so there's reason for it, and so then the extremities can go so far, and that's why you get like the girl's number, which is so like bitey and evil. And
is that the You Could Drive a Person Crazy?
Yeah, and
with the revised lyric, I know.
Yes,
it's slightly more politically correct than the original 1970s version.
There's a few revised lyrics actually. We had the one in The Little Things You Do Together as well.
Yes, I didn't recognise that.
Yes,
from the recording.
It's from Finishing the Hat book, and Sondheim. That was what he originally wrote, and we sort of all listened to it in the book, and that's the one we want to go for. It's just such a great lyric.
And it's got the reinstated scene about the Did You Ever Have a Gay Experience at school, which I believe first came, certainly in Britain, was first done when the Donmar did it a good few years ago with the late Sheila Gish. Anyway, sorry, carry on, please.
No, so I think it does just great justice as a piece. And sort of, if people go, oh God, musical theatre, well, then you sort of go, well, we actually allow it because they're high. So it's brilliant.
But people who go, oh God, musical theatre, aren't people who are ever going to be won over by musical theatre. So
no,
they
completely.
Can go somewhere else. They don't understand the tropes.
That's right.
So you obviously filled with natural, genuine excitement. And also, I love this thing that you were watching what was happening. So, in a sense, you were joining the collective thoughts. That you were plugging into what they were thinking, and therefore presumably able to add into that. It's the collaboration.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little more on that? Because I'm fascinated about how people still think a director is like a 1920s film director. Stands up in jodhpurs and a megaphone and says, "Right, stand there, do this, go away," disappears. The end. Not at all.
No, not in any way. It started with we worked through the scenes from start to finish, and I basically just sat in the room and sort of listen to how Dominic worked with, because when I was thinking of directing, when I do it when I was younger, it was sort of a case of you stand here and you do that, and it worked because I know what I like to see. Whereas
you're a visionary.
And whereas Dominic's brilliant because he has this way of this organic thing coming from the actors, which just works so well, and it brings truth to the piece. Like it's amazing.
You said that because truth is the important thing, isn't it?
Exactly, and it's not robotic in any way, and that's why I think he's so great to work with as an actor.
Also, presumably, performers engage more if they feel that they're being tapped into for what they can bring.
Exactly. There's a good 20 minutes, half an hour before we start the scene. If you talk about, okay, what are these people? What children? What do they think? And then you sort of work through the text, and you really have to. I mean, they are real people, so how would you go through that? And so that was really great. And then you start work on the scene. But it was incredible.
I've got to ask this, and it's as true for you as the cast as well. Forgive me, you're young people, and this is a show which is already 42 years old.
Yeah.
I know this. It was put on the year I was born, so I have a fairly good idea of what it's like. 1970 is a long time ago. It may be 42 years ago, but culturally it's even more.
Yeah.
Because it's actually the tail end of the 60s more than the beginning of the 70s. I know it sounds strange.
Yeah.
How easy is it for you to connect into the zeitgeist, shall we say, of that period? Particularly when the script has been revised, I have to say it, for modern ears. Forgive me, it does get rid of the...
Yeah.
No one would easily and comfortably use the word fag anymore.
No,
and
exactly.
quite right so. But it was a common word in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it isn't a common word now. So, it has been pulled towards this century.
Yes.
How easy is that for you to grasp?
We started, that was still the same with the read-through. We spoke about what the idea was, and, you have to work with Fringe because there isn't a lot of place to store set and all this sort of stuff. But I think the set that was designed by Richard Evans was great. I mean, it just works perfectly for, the production.
But it is quite a lot of living rooms anyway, isn't it? It's not as though you're doing anything too exotic like dangling from therapies or anything like
exactly. So that was... we were showing what we would be working with from the start, and then we started... who found it? I think Dominic found it, but it was a video of the 1970s New York, and so we sort of watched that. That was a good 10-15 minute video, and just sort of a general thing for look and feel and how people... I suppose how busy people are on the streets. But we have a cast of... there's a few people in their 30s, some people in the late 20s, and then there's people in their very early 20s as well. So we have quite a wide range. Some are from New York as well, which always helps. Yes, right. Amy, who plays Joanne, is from New York. Yeah, and so we were very lucky in the sense of because we all just speak about what we know, and so you find out more. And I also think that some people, with Company is a very difficult musical because you either like it or you don't, and that's because you connect to it or you don't. I personally, despite being 20, I do connect to Company, and that's why I can happily sit in that auditorium every day and watch them work because it's just such a brilliant musical and they are phenomenal. But
the fear of commitment is can be a lifelong thing.
Exactly.
I'm a single man.
And I think some people don't connect to that, and that's nothing to do with the cast. That's something to do with sort of, themes for which Sondheim comes from. But yeah, it's a great piece to work with, especially if you connect to it.
I've got to ask you from the direction point of view, however. All musicals are licensed to be performed, and therefore you can't extend too far from the written script unless you're doing Shakespeare or something like that. You can fly that to almost anywhere. So there are limits and constraints, and yet there's also, what can we bring to this? And it's quite tight in its writing. You could do a textbook version of it.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be a million miles away from a highly innovative version of it, because it can't be, because the book keeps you where it is. More than most books, I think.
Yes.
I think it's true sometime along a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Certainly what might be called golden sometime. Is that a constraint for you? Did you and Dominic come in and say, actually, I've got this great idea for it, and can we, how do you stop it being just textbook? Or can you not stop it just being textbook? Because it's... Do you sort of get what I'm saying on this? There's no big idea behind it that you can impose very easily. I'm talking now, sorry.
No, that's all right. Well, to be honest, it was a case of... This was Dominic's first musical as well. And sort of... It took a couple of weeks for me to be able to sort of realise, okay, I can put my ideas in now. Yeah. And that's sort of... And it obviously run by Dominic. But Dominic had a very clear idea of what he wanted. And I think because he's worked with everything, Shakespeare, I think he's done one opera as well. But the text is always going to be the most important thing. But I think the text really, it helps move the whole thing along, and it does... I think it's just one of the things that really does give reason to the songs. And completely, and it's just...
The book is as important as the score, absolutely.
Oh my God, yeah. And a lot of the time some of the songs come in without even realising, because it just so effortlessly flows. For me, I think actually all of them do, especially Sorry Grateful. That's with Ryan Patterson and Alex Bott and Shane. I think it does flow so beautifully, and the text just moves it very easily along.
But there was no big idea. You say Dominic had an idea of what he wanted.
Well, I would assume so, because he was very clear in his. There was no messing about with.
He had clarity. Right?
Yeah, always, yeah.
And what are you proud of getting in as well? You know, you said you were able to feed in your ideas, so...
I'm proud of the fact that when people were in their costume fittings, I was able to be a combination of the girls, Bobby, so I can so when someone goes down, I'll be there.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
No, but it was, well, for me, I mean, I didn't have a massive hands-on approach because Dominic is obviously so great.
But it is a collaborative effort. And even a way of thinking.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a tangible, he comes on in clown shoes because I said so.
No.
But it is, if you know that one character has actually been able to rethink or refocus their character because of something you've said, that must be a very good feeling for you.
Definitely. And I think the most important, what I can hold on to from this is, although the work that you do within the scenes is really great, but I think when you have the conversations before you start the scenes about your opinions and where that takes you, that's the most important thing. So, as you said, maybe something that I said was latched onto by someone. If it was, I don't know. But, I mean, it's the same for everyone. Everyone knows sort of where they're going.
The score. Now, I appreciate your director or assistant director, and there's a musical director who looks after that, and indeed I had the great pleasure of talking to the assistant musical director yesterday. So, it's a collaborative effort between the different people with responsibilities across that board. But for you, how does the score strike you?
Well,
the nitty-gritty of the score.
Yeah, well, I'm a performer by heart, and I think it was very difficult. I think one of the most difficult things for me was to sort of watch them do it, because...
You wanted in.
I wanted in, yeah, completely. The score, God. For me, I mean, the score is... I love it, I absolutely love it. But for me, my favourite parts of the score are the company moments, and even the bits without singing. For me, it's end of Act 1, where Bobby suggests the marriage, and you've got that da-da, and you've just got this movement from the cast when it's sort of like, really, did you just suggest that? And sort of, I think it's those moments that really make the piece. And as great as the musical numbers are, I mean, do not get me wrong, it's just those slight little things.
Well, he's very good at leitmotif, as they used to be called, aren't they? I mean, sometimes there's a little thing that would draw out. I only noticed it the first time. One of the great things about live musicals, live theatre, over sound recordings, is the fact that you can pick out the music and the lyrics, and you can concentrate on what you want.
Yeah.
And also, live music sounds different to recorded music. No, I'm a lyrics man more than a music man. I'm going to make no bones about that. But I was listening to Another 100 People, which is a very clever, very fast, very good lyric. But I know it very well. So I was also listening to music and hearing things which sounded different to me than if I'd been giving a flat listening to a CD. And there's a bit in that where that piece of music you've just described, which is the sort of the Bobby Booby Bubby kind of thing, is actually integrated into the completely different score tune for Another 100 People. And I don't think I'd ever really picked that up. So one of the great things of sitting in an audience is actually think, my goodness, this isn't just an integrated score. You can hear this has been not patched because it's designed that way, but there's an element of that. It's been plugged into this one's fused with that one. It's a fugue. And I don't think you always pick that up. So
we have rep sessions where we sing with the MDs like Andrea and Stuart, and you sort of make your way through some Sundimes as you do, and and I think I was singing Giants in the Sky once, and you sort of go, hang on, this is this, and there's a good tune from a completely different show which I can't actually remember at the moment, but everything just sort of works its way in, and it tends to be done by themes as well. It's not randomly placed there. I mean, everyone knows that with Sundime, but it's just incredible. Every single note, it just means something. And it doesn't really matter if it means something to everyone sitting in the audience. It means something to him. Yeah. And
you write for yourself first, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. And some people know about his life, but just sort of how you see company work. I mean, just how much thought goes into that, and how much he must feel as well.
But here's a question: is there anything that strikes you as odd
in company?
Yeah, that mischimes, because if it's so personal, and one has a view, and it reflects him and his other collaborators at the time, but it's so much of it is him. That's his life, that's his experience, and his experience, he's now an 80-year-old man, so and he was there in the 1970s. He'd been through the 60s. He was a gay man. I think at the time he was single. It's Sunday in the Park with George, isn't it, where he mentions his partner called Louis, I believe.
Yeah.
I always find very amusing. Do you, as a young man in the 21st century, find anything discordant? I don't mean necessarily musically, I just mean...
No, I think the only thing that I find odd about it is, obviously I can't speak for women everywhere, but I think just how good his insight is, because there's a lot of scenes, for example, the Joanne and Bobby scene, just how great his, insight into how Joanne works, and it does predominantly focus on the wives a lot, but just to have that understanding, and like not one of them is the same. I mean, they've all got such different things going on in their lives, but I think that is incredible and odd. His insight into how they work.
It's interesting you pick that relationship as well, because Joanne is the one woman you can say is his friend in her own right. That if she was no longer married to Larry, she would still be friends, and there's a history there. Whereas all the others are couples, and they come together and they go together, and they are bookends. And you can't work out who he was friends with first, or whether he's always been friends with the couples.
Yeah.
Joanne is his female friend.
Quite clearly,
And she's also cut from an entirely different cloth from all. That's not to say anyone's the same, but she's a different generation for a start, and she's Elaine Stritch in the original, which does cut you from a different cloth. Yes, it's very interesting that you picked that one as well, because it's probably the one that gives you more of an insight into the character of Bobby anyway, although he's quite
And I think you actually get more of an insight into her during the moments when she is just looking at him smoking and he is just reeling it off just to get something out of her. I think that's the moment.
Which is the reverse of what he normally does to other people, because normally he asks people the questions, as he's pointed out quite early on.
And that shows how powerful she is as well. And it's a brilliant scene. Love that scene.
It is a clever piece, there's no doubting it, absolutely. Right, and people can see that every day?
Every day, 4:20, just downstairs, but then tickets are available on the same website, company at the Fringe, and obviously at the box office as well.
And it's got the luxury of being the full version, isn't it? It's
it
one
is.
of the very few shows which isn't condensed for Edinburgh.
And I also think Sunday in the Park is a very long show, but Company's not actually that long of a show, and also just how swiftly it moves. I think the cast are great at that, and you sort of realise, Jesus, about the first half, and then the second half is over like that. It's good in a way, because it's sort of like it just shows how brilliant and talented they are as a cast, and fluid, and especially from Dominic and the choreographers and the musicians. God, that's a hard task for them. But yeah, that's great.
So finally then, what next for you?
What's next for me? We've just got cast on our third year shows.
Good. And what are you?
I'll be playing Mushnik in Little Shop.
So you're acting this time?
I am. Yes. Mr. Snow in Carousel, and Hanshin in Spring Awakening. And then
Don't muddle them up.
No, I know. So I've got an incredible season. And then we have our showcase at the Criterion Theatre in London and at Glasgow as well in late January.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. I've stolen lots of it from you.
That's absolutely fine.
And you could have been obviously in the gym making yourself perfect.
I won't do.
All right. But seriously, thank you very much indeed. Thank you also for your great insights. That's been a really interesting conversation on both those shows, and a real eye-opener into the collaborative effort. I think that's, which is so often forgotten about when, people just think these things arrive. So all power to your elbow, as they say, and I wish you huge success both now and in your future career.
Thank you very much.
Musical talk. Well, my thanks to Ryan Ferry there. Very interesting man, and I wish him great success in his career, and I hope we might speak to him again. Well, our last segment in this episode of Musical Talk is a fairly lengthy conversation that David Kingsmill and I had, talking about some of the shows we'd seen together and apart. We touched again upon Bat Boy, but also discussed a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum and how that had been transformed due to the time constraints imposed on most shows at Edinburgh. We discussed Seussical, which is all about transformation. Many of the central characters are trying to change who they are or accidentally change who they are, normally for the better. We discussed Gilbert and Sullivan in Shorts, a potted gallop through the G&S canon. And we also discussed various trends we spotted at this year's Edinburgh Fringe, and also the musical known as Bad Musical. Here's my chat with David. Musical talk. David, as always, welcoming you all back here. Lovely to see you out of your lycra. That's not to say that you aren't wearing something. So I just want to clear that up for the listeners. We're in a public environment, and I think it's important that we should all wear the full corsets and gussets that are required for public decency. Now we're here to continue our Odyssey of Musical Theatre, which takes us down different paths, because obviously you're performing, and I'm merely seeing. So I'm a parasite on the creative arts, whereas you are one of them. And
I would say a symbiote.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Yes, I feed off you, but I suppose there's an element of feeding back, isn't there? But also we go and see shows, and we've seen some shows together, and we have seen some shows not together. So
Indeed.
our experience is quite different in some senses.
Yes.
But let's start this conversation with a show that we saw together, Bat Boy.
Yes.
A very curious, well, a beautiful production of a very curious book, let's be honest.
Extremely curious, and I'm still not entirely convinced I know what some bits of it were honestly about.
For people who haven't seen it, it's a cult musical in America. It's been running for some years. It did come to the West End a few years ago. Slightly disappointing version, I'm sad to say. And we'll talk about why I think that's disappointing in a minute. Why? Because this version I thought was much less disappointing. In fact, I thought they rather made virtues of the plot weaknesses. But let's talk about it from your point of view. You know, what was good about it?
Well, this was a show I hadn't seen before, so for a start I was curious. And whilst the story doesn't hold up to the literary greats of various generations, or indeed any generation, it's fun.
Yeah.
And I think that first and foremost, you know, you need to go and enjoy a show, and it's you need to enjoy a show for a reason, and that's as good a reason as any, as far as I'm concerned. It's an intriguing score. You did say to me before we actually started, spot all the different genres that have basically been transported into this show, and indeed you really can play spot the genre with it. It's definitely been inspired by, but
in fact one or two songs I think have been cut to condense it down, which are quite clear. There was one particular parody I was waiting for which didn't turn up, so
okay.
So I think that was there's more on the bone. Let's put
yes.
Carry on.
Well, there's a sort of counterpoint to that, is the fact that it's a very integrated score, and although you can hear all of these inspirations, they've been wrapped extremely well around a core of the style of the composer.
Yeah.
Which I think is great, because it can be very, very easy to go, let's put in a GNS number or a Sondheim number, and end up making it sound exactly like them or a cheap parody of them.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I agree. I think that was one of the weaknesses of the version I saw in London, that it was very easy to spot the parodies, whereas this time I thought it was slightly harder, and the reason is because it was the group, the band, the orchestra, it's quite a rocky piece.
It is.
That sense of rock pop musical was very much clearer this time round than it was in London. I think perhaps they were trying to be too musically literate in London.
Possible. I mean, it certainly stood up for the simple fact that it was essentially a rock band accompanying the musical.
Yeah.
I can't remember precisely. I think it was 2 keyboards, drums, bass and guitar. I interviewed the MD. He mentions it in there. But I think that the orchestration it suggests a style. And when you've got a style suggested, then you can mix and match other styles with it. Whereas I didn't see the London production, so I can only speculate, but if they were trying to actually put in additional instrumentation or shift it around slightly, then your suggested style becomes a little blurred.
I think one of the reasons the London version didn't work when this version clearly did was distance, because obviously in Edinburgh everything is much more intimate. And it is easier to be successful and engage.
Yes, very true.
There's a lot. It's much more passive in a bigger theatre. You just watch and see what unfolds before you. Whereas you feel so much closer to the action that it's easier to make the.
And it's worth noting actually that we saw this in sort of one of the Fringe's very, very rare actual genuine theatre layouts.
Yes, that's true.
The room was and is laid out as a theatre as standard, but it's not enormous. I have no idea what it would seat, but I can't see it being much over 150, 200.
Yeah, something like that.
So it's still a small, very compact theatre.
But also I think that sometimes things are made worse by throwing money at them. I really do, because...
yes.
there are certain things you need to have in Bat Boy, like costumes and makeup, because obviously there's a man who's half a bat, which means you've got certain prosthetic ears unless you're extremely lucky at the casting stage. So... whereas in London, I think they spent a bit of money on here and spent a bit of money on there, and the whole thing they became carbuncles on the actual book and the story that was trying to be told. So there was almost too much filigree and made you miss the meat. Whereas this time, of course, we got, and it's condensed slightly, so you actually got you got the square meal, but you didn't get the doily as well. Too many doilies hide the meat. There's a lesson. So I thought it was rather good, and I didn't go in expecting it to be good because I didn't really like the score and I didn't really like the show when I'd seen it in London because I was disappointed by it. So this was an attempt at a redemption which really paid off for me.
That's good.
Must pay praise to the central characterisation because the Bat Boy is on most of the time.
Yes, he really is, and he has a very difficult job.
Very physical role.
A very physical role for the first 20 minutes or so. This was a 2-hour production, and for the first 20 minutes to half an hour, he is a feral creature.
Yeah.
Essentially, he moves around quite monkey-like in a way.
He does hang upside down on occasions in a cage, doesn't he?
Hangs upside down, yes, indeed, and is sort of very low to the ground a lot of the time, and crouching and squatting, and it's if you've ever sort of had to do that for a long period of time whilst maintaining a theatrical character, it's damn hard. But he's also got this very guttural. He's grunting and making animalistic noises rather than actually speaking at any point, because he can't at the top of the show. And the sort of combination of those two things put together, with maintaining the character on top, is quite a tour de force for a central character who then has to go on and sing half the rest of the songs in the show.
But I also really like the transition, because he's very, very, one of the jokes is that he's civilised seemingly in a matter of minutes, although I think we are supposed to assume it takes a few days. Certainly it's enough time for the daughter to start having feelings for him.
Yes.
But of course, when he does sort of emerge as the cultured, intelligent, and indeed infinitely more civilised creature than the people of the townsfolk who won't accept him are, I mean, there's the moral, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, yes.
Write that down. He speaks with this rather splendid British accent, because obviously it's set in a sort of, may I say, a redneck American town, not for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
That preach Christian values but don't practice them. That's the other bit of the moral, ladies and gentlemen. So add that to the one you've already written down. And of course he speaks like this, so he's got this little bow tie on, and he's very preppy. He's got a jacket and a blazer and a sort of a tank top, and he wears a tie, and he speaks with a British accent.
He does.
And it's very enunciated, it's very received pronunciation, and therefore very, very funny.
Yes.
Also impossible to work out how he could have picked that accent up in the environment in which he was being civilised.
Absolutely true, yes.
But that's all just part of the fun.
Quite.
Now go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think his development to the point where he's actually seen at the end of the transition to be teaching almost other people, I think just it gets more and more incredulous throughout the transition period. I think it's silly enough in the first place, but
well, the actor whose name's Joe really gave his all, I think, and was fantastic.
He was amazing.
He also gave his hair, because he used to have very fantastically splendid locks, tresses, which have all been shaved off to give him that animalistic sort of battish look,
which works brilliantly.
Yeah, he's got the cheekbones to carry it off. But I'm not expecting you to comment. Yes.
No, but it's very true.
So that's Bat Boy. We liked Bat Boy, didn't we?
Yes. I mean, it's as a show, and this is no reflection on the performance at all. As a show, I don't think I'd probably want to see it for another few years.
Yeah. It's a mess.
It's not a show I would go and see. Like, I mean, Les Mis, I'd quite happily go and see, once every couple of weeks, and I'd be maybe not that frequently, but you know what I mean. There are shows out there that you quite happily go back to. This one, I think I would. I'd like to see it again. I'd like to see it done differently, just not for a long time.
I think that's fair. I mean, that's pretty much what I thought when I first saw it in London a few years ago. So yes, I probably have seen enough Bat Boys, but very nice in terms of Bat Boy, for it to be a good production for me to bow out on with them for a while.
Yes, and a nice one for me to come in on. But no, I think all credit to that company. I think they did a fantastic job with it.
But the Durham University Lights operatic group always turn in a very good performance. I love everything they do, and they've got some fabulous people. Problem is with university groups is that they come and go, obviously, after a few years. So
absolutely,
you spend your time developing them. Well, not me. Obviously, they are developed, and then they go off into the world, hopefully to do some more. We should touch on a few things briefly that we saw together. Just in passing, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum.
I think a funny thing happened on the way to the Edinburgh Fringe as well with this particular one.
They jettisoned. Well, let's explain the circumstances. It's a 2.5 hour show in real life. It's Sondheim's first successful one-man piece. He wrote the music and the lyrics. Great success in America, great success in Britain, periodically revived. But of course, in Edinburgh, you have to condense shows usually because everything has to fit in.
Yeah, very, very few people actually get away, and there is a company
irony, there is a company doing company, which
do the
is
full show.
2.5 hours.
Yeah.
But
with interval.
But
5
that
minutes,
is an extraordinary rarity in Edinburgh. And much more common is what happened to a funny thing happened on the way at Forum, where they had 70 minutes to do the show.
So what did they cut in order to fill their gap?
The score.
Yeah. So we went along merrily, if you pardon the Sondheim pun, to see this with the expectation of at least having a cut-down version of Forum.
Yes.
What we didn't realise was that the book would be more or less intact, but the only song to survive the cull, if I may say, the Roman sacrifice, was Comedy Tonight, which was at the beginning and the end. And, I don't mean this negatively to the company, but it was pre-recorded with voices.
Yes.
And the cast sang along.
Which is a slightly dodgy tactic at the best of times by the best companies.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It wasn't exactly a click track, let's put it that way.
No, and it's also challenging because of the intimacy in Edinburgh, you can actually get away with it less.
Yes, funny enough.
Because it becomes very, very clear that there are more people singing than you're actually looking at on the stage, where in the West End you might be able to blur it. Not that I'm sure they do that.
Also,
but
the fidelity of recording, if I may say, is
yeah.
always going to be slightly less good.
This is why, for example, because Cats had backing singers who were off the stage and would sing along with them, but they would actually be there every night singing. And
so they were doing it live at least, yeah.
You got the full quality. If there was a nuance in the performance that slightly shifted, you could match it. Whereas if you've got a pre-recorded choir singing with you, you're kind of stuffed if something goes wrong. Which, not to say it particularly did, but it does. It throws up its own set of challenges.
I think that's very fair. And we've touched upon this. There's one line in that song that you have to perform in a way that to make it make sense.
Yes.
Because the song is essentially about, tonight you're in a theatre, you can either have a comedy or a tragedy. Those are really the options in the theatre. Tonight we just happen to be doing a comedy, but we're so versatile, you could see us in other shows. And that actress over there is later on, although she's playing a silly old bag today, is going to be playing Medea next week. Is essentially, if you don't know, Medea is a high Greek tragedy, a high Roman tragedy, no, Greek tragedy.
Greek, yeah.
That's right. About a woman who kills her own children to spite her lover. So it's laughs all the way, that one.
Absolutely.
But you need to set up the fact that an actress is going to play Medea, and they didn't do that. They sang the piece as a chorus, and they didn't point to any of the actresses.
No, dead straight, out front.
So it was a bald recitation of the words which meant nothing.
It was. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's because they decided they needed to put a song in for short notice and didn't have time to sort of fully direct it. I don't know what the reasoning was, but...
Well, it did say words and music by Stephen Sondheim on the poster, because I checked.
Yes, it did. And that just kind of confused the matter even more, really.
However, I don't want to go out on a bad note with these people, because I have to say, they were very true to the book, and they put in some cracking performances.
Yeah, it was a hilarious production.
Yeah, it was.
Really good.
They got all the laughs, and the actor... Well, I very much enjoyed the actor playing Senex, who's the senator with the domineering wife, but the actor who really stole the show for me was the young man playing Hysterion.
Yes, his timing was spectacular.
Yeah, that man's a born-like comic. I think we probably ought to move on from...
yes.
So there's a funny thing happened as we went away from the Forum. Another show that we saw together was Seussical.
Yes, I think both for the first time.
Yes, I didn't really know anything about it, except I knew from the title that it was about Dr. Seuss and his creations.
Well, I'd heard at some point in time, one of my friends gave me a CD with a few sort of recordings on it, and I was given about half of the Seussical score. So I have to admit, I hadn't listened to it an awful lot on the simple grounds that I couldn't work out what was going on and got bored. And so this was the first time I was actually hearing the full score. Or as much of it as they presented anyway.
Let me lay down my initial views on this. I thought the production itself was very sound.
Yes.
I thought particularly the actor playing Horton the Elephant had that kind of lugubrious but kind-hearted attitude needed for that character all the way through. I thought the costumes were splendid. Someone has bought 1,000 miles worth of polka-dotted material and really gone to town and made costumes for everyone, because there were lots of really exotic costumes.
Yeah, they were very good.
And changes as well in one or two cases. There is, however, a big problem with this show. It wasn't, I don't think, the production's fault. I think it's very much the writer's fault, and that's both the book writer and the composers and the lyricist.
Absolutely.
And that is, it's as dull as Ditchwalker, and it's aimed at children.
Yes.
And there's a fundamental problem with this. The very opening song is about, isn't Dr. Seuss marvellous? Look, he opens up your mind to imagination and free thinking and weirdness and embraces all that strange stuff. You know, when you read a Dr. Seuss book, it's the perspectives are wonky and the colours are all strange, and there's sort of Heath Robinson devices of pipes and taps connected to each other and juxtaposition in a surreal sense. So there is lots of very weird stuff going on in a Dr. Seuss book. the opening number, as I say, was all about opening your mind. If there was a theme to the story, it was about being open to new ideas and allowing that to happen. Therefore, unfortunately, the way they chose to portray that through the book and music was to be as conventional and dull and hackneyed and cliched as it was possible to be.
Yes.
I was bored stiff, and I was bored stiff within about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Because it was the interweaving of 2 or 3 stories, I think, from the Dr. Seuss book, told absolutely blandly, absolutely squarely. So it wasn't done with any flourish. There was absolutely nothing for adults. It was clearly a children's show, not a family show, a children's show.
And that is a spectacular failure, in my opinion, because if you've got young children coming to a show, their parents are going to be bringing them.
Yeah, and paying for them.
And paying for them where children might actually be getting in free, depending on where you're going. And you have to keep the adults entertained.
Or they won't come again.
Or they won't come again. Now, I saw, going ever so slightly off track, I saw a beautiful play which has been around for years called The Man Who Planted Trees. It's gone around the world. It's hugely successful. Its presentation is aimed at kids, but the story is a complete mix of age groups. And there were jokes in there that the kids wouldn't have even understood were jokes, let alone got. Seuss School didn't have that in the slightest. If you were over the age of about 6, then you were a bit too old for the show, basically. And it's, as you say, it's an extraordinarily bland piece. I got very irritated. I had a rather badly written review accuse me of being unoriginal, and I want to send that reviewer to go and see this.
Seussical, yes, absolutely.
Because, I think their accusation in my case was completely unfounded, but in Seussikal's case it would have very good grounding, so maybe they should go and review that, and we'll swap the reviews over.
What did you make of the score?
It's intriguing, it's fun, it's upbeat, it does have, it's got a good pace to it, I think, and
tempo is about the only thing I'd offer it. But
to be honest, I think that's the problem. Is it's a long string of upbeat songs intermixed with 3 or 4 sort of, and actually I should clarify at this point. It's difficult to know, not knowing the full soundtrack, whether or not they cut any songs from the show.
Yes,
I don't know, because this was done in an hour and 15 minutes, I think.
Really, I thought about 4.5 years.
Yeah, quite. Just double checking on the... Yes, it was indeed an hour and 15 minutes. And presumably it was intended to be a slightly longer show originally. I don't know. But it was, a whole series of upbeat, quick songs interspersed with 3 or 4 rather slow and, with no fault to the performers, slightly monotonous songs.
Yeah, I agree. I thought one song really bled into another. It was sort of... To my untutored ear, it sounded a bit rocky, a bit poppy. But actually, the thing that really irritated me most was that kind of what I think of as ersatz swing. The original swing era has a very distinctive sound, and swing is a marvellous form of music, and I love it. Modern swing, often done on synthesizers and things like that, seems to miss it. And this is one of the problems of the reorchestration of the Hot Mikado, by the way. I don't know if you're aware of this. The Hot Mikado is a 1930s, early 40s show in America.
Yes.
Where they basically swung Sullivan.
Yeah.
And it was a huge, huge success for Bill Bojangles Robinson, who was a big black performer of the period, a massive superstar. Unfortunately, they lost all the orchestration, so it was recreated in the 80s. It was recreated with 1980s and 1990s style reimaginings of what the swing of the 30s and 40s were. And it always sounds false to me. I call it ersatz swing because it's always immediately spottable. And this was ersatz swing in 1 or 2 cases. But we have to stress again, this is not the production's fault, it is not the performer's fault. I think
No, and I think it's probably also slightly tempered by the fact that we got so bored.
Yeah, we did.
Which, again, no fault of the production, it's just the show. And I imagine probably the greatest sort of uplifting thing for the adults would probably be the kids' reactions. So if you did go with your own kids, their own pleasure may well carry you through this, because the kids really seem to be enjoying it.
Yes, I mean, let's be honest, we weren't the target audience, and because it was a children's show, there were children who were enjoying it. There wasn't any screaming, and there wasn't any going to the lavatory, which is always a good sign that the children are engaged.
The only thing that was particularly sort of noticeable in actual fact was we were sitting relatively close to the back on the flat section of this particular auditorium with a couple of children in the row behind us who couldn't actually see. They must have had about 16 chairs between them and the stage. So they kept moving. And that was, the only distraction was them actually going to get a better view.
Yeah, they walked down the aisle every now and then.
They did, which I think
engaged,
is actually probably quite a good thing from there. It's slightly annoying for us, but good for them. The simple fact that they were obviously enjoying, and it was the other thing, of course, with this production, which we probably should have mentioned with the costumes, was it was extraordinarily colourful.
Oh, crikey, yes, absolutely.
I mean,
primary colours all the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, colourful to the point of, you know, not quite being painful on the eyes, but nearly. Yeah. Which is a good thing for this kind of show because, you know, it picks it up.
I also went to see a show yesterday, which was the same day we saw Susical, which was called Gilbert and Sullivan in Briefs. And it's been advertised by having a caricature of both Gilbert and Sullivan wearing polka-dotted boxer shorts.
Slightly, what's the word?
Anachronistic?
Thank you.
I thought it might be. Now, I was really looking forward to this because, everyone knows I'm a GNS fan, but it purported to be a potted GNS. In the sense of all 14 operetta in 60 minutes.
Yes.
And I thought, well, that sounds fabulous, because as far as I'm concerned, there is real scope for an interesting kaleidoscope show for Gilbert and Sullivan, because it's so early musical theatre, and in some senses they're setting down the parameters and the rules, and also, you know, the modern variations and developments haven't yet occurred. So the tempos are, for the most part, fairly standard.
Yes.
There's no syncopation or anything like that, so it's one of the criticisms people make of Sullivan, but you have to remember that he was working 150 years ago, so there was no way he was going to invent the boogie-woogie beat.
No.
But the advantage, and because the lyrics were written before the music for Gilbert and Sullivan, and there's only so many ways of dealing with the metre of a poem, shall we say, or a lyric, Sullivan's genius, in some senses, is to develop so many variations on standard metre and tempo.
And he is very restricted by what the style of the day, as you say. Yeah. I think I'm trying to think now whether there's even an example of melisma in Gilbert and Sullivan, which is where you sing...
Isn't she the witch in Wicked?
No. No, where
please.
melisma being where you sing the same syllable over more than one note.
Oh, right, how interesting.
So, for example, actually, the more florid... not florid, what's the word I want? The more flowery amens, for example, where you have that sort of amen, the R would be a melisma, because it's all several syllables all over one. Sorry, several notes for one syllable.
I'm not sure there is.
I'm not sure.
Someone will let me know, but I don't think it's very common.
Yeah, I could be entirely wrong, but thinking about it for the moment, I struggle to think of many examples of that outside, maybe in particular types of song. But certainly most of what's springing into my head as we're talking is all one note per...
Bum, 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 bum.
Yeah.
I mean, I love GNS, and I do appreciate there's a little bit of the rumpity-dumpity-dump, although, of course, they were the first people to do that successfully. But the point I'm trying to make is I think that if I'd been asked to write a show where they were going to weave all 14 together, I would have taken that as an advantage, because what that allows you to do is you can sometimes fit one set of lyrics to the same tune. So you could play a well-known...
Sounds like status quo.
You could play a well-known melody from an operetta and then sing 3 or 4 different lyrics and weave in and out and do something interestingly... we were talking earlier, it's not a narrative kaleidoscope, it will be a musical kaleidoscope, because you'd actually be navigating the pieces through music.
Yes.
And indeed, at one level, this is very boring, but Sir Charles Mackarus in the 1930s, I think, basically wrote a ballet based on the entire Gilbert and Sullivan scores, and he did exactly that. So basically it's a 30-minute interweaving of all the music of Gilbert and Sullivan, and so you hear all the shows absolutely afresh because they segue into totally different things. So in a sense, there's already something going on here. So somebody clever could have done something like that. What we got was 4 actors and a pianist. The pianist was fantastic, by the way, because he was able to vamp in various Sullivan tunes as required, as the actors were doing this, that and the other, and make transitions from when there were medleys and things like that. But what we essentially got was a conceit of 2 men and 2 women singing. They get a letter from their producer at the beginning saying that their fee will be tripled if they can do all 14 operetta in an hour. So they all feverishly do it. So what you get is you get potted versions of all 14 when I say that, actually. They concentrate on things like the Pirates of Penzance and the Mikado. And,
presumably because that's what people recognise.
Absolutely. Whereas the last two, Utopia Limited and the Grand Duke, which general lore is that they're not that good, although I'm pleased to say that people are starting at last to come around to the fact that actually they're just as good as all the others, and lovely, I think. Are more or less trashed. The way they deal with those two is they get them all four actors read out the plots for the two operate at the same time, so you can't even hear what's going on. So, there's a bit of cheating going on, but it's very...
Wow.
But so, whilst their singing voices were absolutely beautiful, and you got a few of the arias and songs of the shows, they weren't necessarily always representative. The whole of Iolamphe was represented by the Nightmare song, whereas we got a segue of the Mikado with extracts from each of the songs from the entire show in that. So they did it very differently.
That's a shame. I mean, that can work, because, of course, the complete works of Shakespeare abridged, you go through the entire histories in the space of a commentary on a football game.
Yes.
But the way that it's done gives you enough. So it's a shame that they couldn't have thought of some sort of device that would actually allow them to do that with, because obviously with Shakespeare you've got 97 minutes to do 47 plays, whereas here you're only actually dealing with 14, and yet you've still allowed yourself an hour.
Although you've got songs in this case.
Yes, you do have songs, but even so, they're it's a pity to rush over, and that would be also a very good opportunity to say, come and see Gilbert and Sullivan, here's the Mikado, but here's something you haven't heard before.
Yeah.
Rather than jumping over the top of it.
But there was one other fundamental flaw with this, which we were discussing before we started recording this, which seems to be endemic at this year's Fringe, not just in musicals, but in lots of shows, which is the added subplot, which is unnecessary and relates to the actors themselves. I suppose you could call it meta-theatre, although I think that would be overwhelming what is actually a very weak device for plotting with very heavy terminology, because in this there was a subplot that one of the men and one of the women had previously had a relationship and now were not on talking terms, and so there was an awful lot of sort of off-piste sarcasm and business revolving around their petty revenges on each other on stage whilst trying to perform, which then of course they realise how much they miss each other by the end of the show and sort of reunite. I wouldn't mention this too much. I don't think I'd have been too bothered by it, although I didn't think they could have found a better way to do what they were trying to do and then not add other stuff on to distract from what they were trying to do. But I've been to see other shows which were not musicals. So, for example, I saw a very jolly show called The Complete History of the BBC in 60 Minutes, which was a man and a woman telling the absolutely fascinating story light-heartedly, so that, it's held up on its own. But they had the subplot of, guess what? The man and the woman's relationship is in difficulties, and that comes across whilst they're trying to tell you the story. Unnecessary subplot. And I saw a fantastic comedy drama called Love All, about a highly celebrated murder case in the Edwardian era, about an Irish baronet who murders a Swedish heiress for her money. Brilliantly done, two-hander again, but guess what? The man and the woman have got some kind of difficult relationship in real life, which keeps invading the story. It's a hackneyed plot. If you're not sure of your material, rewrite your material. Don't just add. I think I'm fed up. I'm sorry, I have to say that. This is my fair weather warning to all writers of Fringe pieces for the future. Please stop with the actors having a relationship and buggering up the story motif. I'm bored of it.
It's like they've all read the little rule that says a good story must have a love story, which, by the way, I think is absolute rubbish.
It is. Have you seen Reservoir Dogs?
A good story holds up perfectly well without a love story in it. So, new writers, that's my fair weather warning. Yeah. Stop paying attention to that bit of advice, because it's nonsense. But it's like they've all read that and gone, oh, hang on, we haven't done that. How do we get around this?
I know, the actors.
This is an interesting point, actually. Do you find that there are not time sensitive, that's the wrong phrase, but fashionable Fringe faux pas?
Oh God, yes.
Because we were talking shortly after Newland, and it was about one of the only criticisms I could really pull up with the show, with their ocular anachronism. And the continued ocular anachronism, which Beth also suffered from, which we discussed in our other interview. Both cases, Newland obviously set in the Wild West, 1880s. Beth set in times where people wore leather armour and carried swords, with extraordinarily modern pairs of glasses on the stage.
Designer
glasses, which just seemed it's something, I wonder, is that something you've seen before, where you have these...
It's happened more in the last few years, because a few years ago, not that it doesn't matter if it's a concert, because you can wear whatever spectacles, because you're not playing a character. But in those pieces, a few years ago, people at least went as far as getting metal-framed round spectacles. If they were doing a 30 show, they were doing that. You very rarely see people wearing spectacles in a Tudor piece. But you're right, people are doing it a lot more now.
But I mean, do you think are there fashions that go through of sort of, okay, that's this year's generic cock-up?
This year's weakness.
Yeah.
Well, there are, and I remember at the time thinking of them, but of course I can't now bring them to mind. But
no.
There are various tropes that happen every year, sometimes over 2 or 3 years. We're living in the success zone of the 39 Steps. Not that this is musicals at all. But the 39 Steps in London has now been going for a very long time. It's been franchised across the world. You can see it in Rome and all manner of bits and pieces.
Yes.
And it's one of these very original things where, it's been done before, but the success of that is making other people do similar things. Where you make a virtue out of a cheap production, and it's all imagination. And a crate will be a seat on a train, but it might also be the side of a house, and you have one door, and if you do it for comic effect, you can make a great deal.
And
of
actually,
that. It's fabulous.
It's quite a good way to do a Fringe show, because you often have... I have no storage space at the back of my venue whatsoever.
Although the only thing you have to store is you, isn't it? Essentially?
Well, yes, I'm lucky in that sense. But, if I had any kind of set, I'd be struggling at the back. But yeah, so I can understand that, but I get where you're going with it as well.
But that one's all right, because that's a theatrical trend, and if you can carry it off, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do a good show with that. But there are more irritating trends. There's also fashions in shows. I think we've mentioned that, the last 5 years seems always to have at least 2 productions up in
As
Edinburgh.
it does this year.
Yeah. In fact, it's quite interesting to spot student trends and young theatre trends. Assassins is a very great popular show for youthful ensemble groups. Partly because it doesn't have a star vehicle, of course.
Yes.
Interestingly, there's no central character.
Absolutely.
Even the balladeer is not always on all the time.
No, well, it's the similar thing with... it's not done so much over here, although, having just said that, Trinity did it as their end-of-year show this year, but for their graduating students. But Grand Hotel,
yes,
same thing. There's 1 or 2 characters who drive the story slightly more, but it's more about everybody else. And actually, I didn't look in to see whether that was up at the Fringe, but I don't think it is.
I haven't seen it.
And I don't think I've seen it up at the Fringe in the sort of years I've been looking at it, which seems... I suppose it does need to be done on a certain scale, and it's difficult to cut. But if there is a company who's going to be doing company, why not have a company doing Grand Hotel? Because it's a lesser known and actually very good featured ensemble musical. But anyway, that's getting slightly off track. But no, it's just interesting to see what the anachronism of the year is.
Well, I think you've probably won it with the spectacles, although I think quality haircuts is also coming close second. There was some amazing gel work going on in 1 or 2 of the shows, including Newland.
Yes.
These are the cleanest, best-seeing cowboys in the world. Although, we're only mentioning for Newland because that's a show we've already mentioned it on, but it's happening a lot elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the thing is, funny enough, you said this yourself, that you don't have to wear spectacles on stage. If you really have bad sight, you can get contact lenses.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's a truism that everybody can wear contact lenses. I know a couple of my friends actually are unable to because I struggle to because I've got a massively overactive blink reflex, but I've managed to force it in because I didn't want to go on stage playing, whoever. I've played Richmond in my time in Richard III, and God forbid he'd wear spectacles.
I quite like the idea of Mr. Millennium also wearing specs because that just makes him ever more human.
The funny thing is, I did actually look into doing that, but they don't fit under the mask.
Oh, of course, yes, you have to wear a cowl, don't you?
I do have designer glasses, and they have a very thin rim and would get crushed. So yes, but I force myself to wear contact lenses. And I suppose if these guys are just setting out in their careers, then it's something they wouldn't have made the decision to do yet. But it's something to look at for future because it unfortunately, it will stand out.
It can do, certainly, absolutely.
If you've worked to set yourself in a certain era, and somebody comes on wearing something that doesn't match it, it will catch somebody's eye, if not everybody's. And actually, I think in Newland's case, it wasn't the end of the world. I think they actually It was only on a couple of occasions, and it was hidden rather well.
Yeah.
But there were other shows. I mean, Beth, it stood out like a sore thumb.
Well, actually, in Newland, they're quite clever because one of the brothers, there are 3 brothers, 2 of which are played by the same actor.
Yes.
And one of the brothers wears spectacles, and one of the brothers doesn't.
Yes. So that was obviously a costume designer, and therefore, in their case, it's entirely defensible.
Yeah. It did have a plot purpose. Another show that I saw without you, I'm afraid, David, was called Bad Musical. I believe it was up here a few years ago, and it's been revived. I think by the same people. It's difficult to describe because it is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a small group of people. There's a conceit, basically, and they're trying to put on a musical, but due to an administrative error, their 3-hour show has got to fit in an hour-long format, so they have to abridge it, but they abridge it on the spot, so there's lots of really quite painful segues from one step to another.
But deliberately painful.
But deliberately, yeah. So if you were aware of Acorn Antiques, not the musical, but Acorn Antiques when it was a sketch on the Victoria Wood television programme, that was a programme, that sketch made a virtue of missing telephone cues or the sound effects not being played at the right time or people having to improvise around the words because they've forgotten.
Yeah.
If something goes wrong, you're doing it as live, which of course is what you do in a theatre. So the very first thing that happens is that the leading woman leaves the show. So whenever the love interest is played, the hero has to speak to a broomstick with a pink balloon with a face written on it and pre-recorded female dialogue over the top. And of course, if he misses a cue, he's missed a cue. But there's lots of clever stuff as well. There's a song where 3 or 4 people are singing, and they all sing their songs, and then of course they all sing their different lyrics together at the end. But it's cut in such a way that it makes a new sentence, which all sounds very rude. So you're singing one sentence, and then you intercut with a word from another of the songs going on at the same time, and it's all very filthy. And my favourite musical piece of all is when the hero's mother is dying. And she's got her final lament with the advice that son, I've got this final advice to give you. It's all pre-recorded music, and the conceit is the backing track keeps skipping on the CD, so she never actually gets to give her advice. And so they try and play it 3 or 4 times. She starts singing the song, and then every time she's about to say what the advice is, it jumps a bit, and then it cuts almost immediately to her dying. So the son has to leave the scene without actually knowing what the dying advice was, which is a driver for the plot. So all in all, brilliant. But you couldn't call it a good musical, obviously, and they didn't.
No,
because there's the jokes, the songs are there for joke purposes and comedy purposes, but they aren't necessarily there for musical merit. But that's not the game it's playing.
No,
it's
quite.
Well worth seeing, but don't go in expecting harmonic beauty.
Fair enough.
Well, David, thank you very much for talking to me today.
A pleasure as always.
It's a great, and I hope that you'll get to see many more shows in Edinburgh because you're staying longer than I am. That's because you're performing. You have to.
Yes, I'm rather stuck. But not that that's a bad thing.
But I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Indeed, likewise.
Musical Talk. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Musical Talk. Join me again next week for the last of my episodes about the Edinburgh Fringe. And that one will be themed around the ones that got away. When I'll be talking to various people involved with shows that I just wasn't able to catch or see due to time constraints. Sad but true. But for the time being, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode and its analysis of transformation in musical theatre, and I leave you with the words that Dr. Jekyll might have said to Mr. Hyde: why don't you change into something more comfortable? Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented by Thos and David Kingsmill and was edited and produced by Thos. Copyright Musical Talk 2012. Now for some musical out-talks. We are actually recording now. I've got a gauge on there, so if you're actually seeing my bald head with its lovely peeling post-Olympic weather, that's what that is. Right, okay. Oh, right, sorry. I'll cut that gap out. Sorry, that's me being unprofessional. I'm so sorry. It does happen. How can people see it?
It's at 9:05 every night at C Main on Chambers Street. The show, we should note, is 2 hours long, not 1 hour, as the flyers have a small mistake on them. That was a result of our original. We had an original 1 hour time slot, and then we realised
quite small.
Yeah, we realised the show had to be 2 hours long, really. So it's now 2 hours. And 9:05 every night on Chambers Street. Yeah, thank you.
Ed Fringe will show you how.
Ed Fringe will show you the way.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for spending time with me.
So yeah, basically to explain, because you weren't in on the conversation earlier, I work for Musical Talk. It's a musical theatre podcast, and we basically we do review shows. Indeed, we just gave Bat Boy 4 stars and a comment. But the basic premise of this is that we talk about what we enjoy, and the universal thing being musical theatre in one form or another. And so yeah, we've just interviewed Joe and I didn't get their names, but the producer and the
Doug,
director.
And John.
Yes, that's it. But I thought I'd steal you for a couple of moments. So if you could just very quickly introduce yourself, so that I can get a level on your voice.
Now, tell me, in your case...
Ladies and gentlemen, for patrons with tickets for this evening's performance of Heidi Hobo, please queue up outside on the right. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Sorry.
Very simple. If you say something that you'd rather you hadn't said, I think a member of the cast is absolutely rubbish, and you realise you rather you hadn't said it, just say, take it out. I will cut that out. We're not Panorama. I'm not here to cause trouble. And the one thing I would ask is, can I ask you to budget just a little closer, because I'm afraid it's a fairly make do amend job.
Sure.
I'll ask you to give me your name, the name of the show, and your involvement in it, and then we'll take it from there.
Cool.
What you do? It was interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, the house is now open for this afternoon's performance of The Miller's Tale. Please make your way to +3. The house is now open for this afternoon's performance of The Miller's Tale. Please make your way to +3. Thank you.
You've put that little gap in it to make it sound exciting. Please make your way to +3. I love that. Sorry, forgive me. If you had a heartbeat, it would be on television. You know? As I say, because it's at double speed as well, so you think, I know it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon's performance of The Miller's Tale is about to commence.
Please take your seats in +3. This afternoon's performance of The Miller's Tale is
about to commence. Please make your way, take your seats.
So close.
He knew you were doing it. He's watching on CCTV. I do a lot of recording in the Royal Festival Hall. I've interviewed a lot of people there, and exactly the same thing happens. You're halfway through something absolutely fascinating, and they say, auditorium is now open. So there's a slightly heightened sense in the direction. Is that actually... Because it is that difficult thing, isn't it, of balancing the truth of
Ladies and gentlemen, the house is now open for this afternoon's performance of This Is So. Please make your way to +1. The house is now open for this afternoon's performance of This Is So. Please make your way to +1. Thank you.
+1.
and have now become addicted, and I'll leave it at that, or I'll be carried away.
This afternoon's performance of This Is So is about to commence.
Are you a fan, by the way?
I am. We started both rehearsals with Andrew would tell me where she's up to in Doctor Who, and I'd do the whole, oh my god, that's the best one. Wait till you get to the next one.
Oh my god.
You were halfway through a sentence, sorry.
No, I was just, so I've become addicted to it. But
what would you both take away from it? Yes, thinking time. Don't worry, I'll cut this bit out so you sound fluent and knowledgeable immediately. I'd like to give you some stars, by the way. Have you had any stars yet?
We have had stars, as in reviewing stars. Yes. We've had 4 stars for Active Legend,
4 stars from The Scotsman and 5 stars from One for Review.
Well, I was going to give you 4 stars, if that was okay.
That's great.
And, I'll give you a quotation as well. So I'll say it formally on here, but I'll write it down for you so you can take it off.
Oh, thank you.
It's any use.
Yeah, that's great.
And really loved, which is Departure Lounge.
Indeed.
Not a new show for Edinburgh. It's Dougal Irvin's Departure Lounge. It's been up here a few times. This time it's a completely new independent production.
Mm-hmm.
First time you'd seen it, I think.
First time I'd seen it.
Although you knew the music from the recording.
I did. Yes, it's. I've had the CD now for about 2.5 odd years.
So your take?
My take was that it made an awful lot more sense once
once the narrative bits were filled in.
Once the narrative bits were filled in, yes. It's some of the bits on the CD, it's unclear precisely what's happening.
Because there are flashbacks, it must jolt back and forth a bit if you haven't got the...
It does, and it's not entirely clear from the CD how the flashbacks are actually done. You're aware, I think, that they're reliving memories, if you like, and that obviously the girl Sophie that they're all singing about isn't actually present. But you're not quite sure, I certainly wasn't quite sure, how this would be realised on stage, how it would be realised with the book, what the setup for it was. And actually it was really nice to clear that up, because it's sort of made me... I mean, I love the score anyway. I think it's a fantastic piece of scoring, but something that just wanted slightly more to clarify it. And now that that's been done, I feel like I've got a much better appreciation of the show.
Talk about it musically. I'm interested because it's unusual in the sense it's easily orchestrated for guitars.
It is, 2 guitars.
Dougal's principal instrument, I think, although obviously he can do everything. And so that's exactly what we had in this version, wasn't it? It was 2 guitars in the corner, giving it some welly, if I may say, and getting the whole sound. Can I just double check? We haven't discussed this, have we?
You know what? I'm thinking that we have done. Because as we're talking about it, this is sounding familiar. But what else have we not talked about then?
Well, I think we have talked about this because we spoke about the Bing Bong chimes for the airport, didn't we?
We did. You're right.
So we must have done this when we did this the other day, then. All right.
There was... Hang on. So
we spoke about Armada, didn't we?
We've done Armada. We've not done Bat Boy. We've not done Funny. We've done Departure Lounge. We've done Me. We've done Newland.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I wasn't counting Me. Because I was trying to work out what we'd discussed. Maybe I didn't count that.
We certainly discussed you.
So Seussical and Bat Boy is all that's left.
Well, let's start with Bat Boy.
And Funny.
And Little Bits, yeah.
My bad.
No. It was only as we could plan through. I thought, okay, well, we've clouded that particular furrow. I'll keep the introduction, but I'll just cut straight in. What should we chat about next?
Seussical? Get
Seussical.
Mixtures out the way. Get that out the way too.
There we are. Yeah.
This is what happened the whole way through my in-between interview. They were moving scenery around the National, and every few moments someone would rumble past.
Sometimes, though, you just have to grin and bear it, although they are making an enormous job. And he does just seem to have gone all the way, I suppose, a staircase over there, isn't it? That's the only way around. Now, are you okay with that?
Yes, that's fine.
And is there anything you want in or out? I mean, obviously, I'll cut out the speaking and
no, of course.
Conversational chat.
I was going to say, I can't even remember what I said in my rambling, but just as long as it was quite clear Dominic's the director there.
Yeah. Oh,
but that'd be great.
No, you were very good about making sure that
yes.
In fact, almost you were too modest, I think, in some senses. Right. Was that all right? Nothing in or out? You're okay?
No, that sounds fine.
Thank you. That was a beautiful conversation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, is that all right for you? Is there anything in there that you want taken out? Or?
I think we're pretty much happy with everything.
I'm turning off. There we go.